Greyhaven was a quiet harbour on a loud sea, and winter was the season when the North Sea tried to prove it owned both. Stormwood Beacon burned on the cliff, steady and proud, while below it pilots rowed into black water and pretended it was normal work. Nets were mended by lamplight, signal fires were argued over like they were personal insults, and somewhere out in the fog a low-moving flame kept appearing where it did not belong, asking a simple question in the most irritating way possible. If you listened carefully, the sea had rules. If you listened to people, they had excuses. Osric Pike, the harbour pilot, preferred rules, Eda Thorne preferred results, and Wulf Rowan preferred his beacon to be respected at all times. Together they would guide ships through storms, fog, and pride, while an inland man with polished boots tried to turn Greyhaven's lights into his leash. This is a calm story about cold water, warmer lamps, and the quiet drama of getting home safely while the North Sea rolls its eyes at everyone. Chapter 1. The Beacon at Greyhaven. Greyhaven was the kind of harbour that looked peaceful only if you had never tried to arrive there in winter. From the cliff it seemed gentle enough, a crescent of dark water, a shingle beach, a line of low huts crouched behind a stone wall that had learned to lean into the wind. From the sea it looked like a warning. The North Sea liked to offer opinions, and Greyhaven was where many of those opinions arrived first. Winter came early that year, which was not unusual, but it came with a particular confidence. The first cold mornings brought a skin of ice on puddles and a thin white crust on the edge of the tide line. People stepped over it as if it was someone else's problem. They spoke about the weather the way they spoke about a loud neighbour. They acted polite. They complained constantly. They kept working anyway. On Beacon Cliff stood Stormwood, the beacon tower. It was not tall in the way that made kings proud. It was tall in the way that made sailors grateful. A stout stone base rose to a wooden platform where the fire basket waited, empty during calm days and hungry during storms. The tower had rules, carved into memory and muttered like prayers. Keep the fuel dry, keep the signals clear, keep watch at dusk and dawn. Do not let boys play with the tinder. Do not let grown men play with the tinder either, because they behaved worse. Wulf Rowan kept the beacon. He lived in a hut that smelled of smoke, salt, and the sharp tang of pitch. He had a face shaped by wind and habit, with eyes that squinted even indoors as if he expected the roof to blow away at any moment. He took the beacon personally. If the fire burned bright, it was because of his care. If the fire sputtered, it was because the world had failed to respect his schedule. Below the cliff, the harbour took its own shape. A line of timber piers reached into the water like cautious fingers. The pilings groaned with each swell, and the ropes were always wet, always rough, always in need of attention. Nets hung from poles to dry, and in winter they never truly dried. They simply became less wet for a while. Eda Thorne mended those nets. She sat in the lamplight inside a shed near the docks, her hands moving with the steady speed of someone who had learned that complaining did not fix holes. The lamp was an oil bowl with a wick, shaded with a bit of metal that made the light fall on her work. It made a warm circle in a cold room. It made a small world where knots mattered more than storms. Osric Pike visited that shed often, mostly to borrow warmth and the feeling that the day was still under control. He was Greyhaven's harbour pilot, which meant he did the work that other men loudly admired and quietly avoided. When a ship needed to find the channel in foul weather, Osric rowed out in a small pilot boat, climbed aboard, and told the captain where not to die. It was a service that looked heroic from the shore and felt damp from every other angle. Osric had a calm face and a mind that ran like a tide clock. He listened to wind, water, and the small shiver of a boat's hull. He learned every rock and sandbar the way a shepherd learned the moods of sheep, which was to say with constant suspicion. He did not have a dramatic laugh or a dramatic scowl. He saved his drama for moments when it might be useful, which were rare. That afternoon the sky was the colour of old iron, the wind slid along the cliff and dropped into the harbour with a hiss. A few fishing boats were tied up, their crews busy with repairs and gossip. A merchant ship sat farther out at anchor. waiting for a better tide to come in. Waiting was a fine idea, and merchants did not enjoy fine ideas unless they promised profit. Bryn Hale, the dock reeve, walked the piers with his hands behind his back, inspecting as if the tide might feel guilty and behave. He wore a cloak that had once been decent, but had since developed a permanent relationship with salt spray. Bryn believed in order. Greyhaven did not share that belief, but it humoured him. He stopped by Ida's shed. Ida did not look up. Bryn cleared his throat. Ida continued to stitch. Bryn finally spoke in a voice designed for meetings. "The nets are torn again." Ida answered in a voice designed for reality. "The sea does not fill out a request before it tears them." Bryn took that as agreement. "Osric is in town." Ida made a small sound that might have been amusement. "Osric is always in town unless the sea is trying to swallow someone." As if summoned by the mention of swallowing, a shout rose from the end of the pier. A lookout pointed toward the outer water. Osric stepped out into the cold and followed their gaze. A sail, dark against the darker sea, appeared beyond the line of Raven Reef. It was heading toward Greyhaven with the slow persistence of something that did not fully understand what it was doing. The wind was pushing from the north, and the sea was lifting itself into uneven shoulders. Osric narrowed his eyes. "That ship is late." Bryn sighed. "Late ships are my favourite kind. They are never late for calm weather." Ida set her needle down and stood, pulling her shawl tighter. "Stormwood is not lit." It was true. Beacon Cliff stood with its tower dark, the fire basket empty. Wulf would not light it without reason. Fuel was precious, and pride was even more precious. Osric looked up the cliff, then he looked back at the sail. The ship was closer now, and the sea around it looked restless. A late ship in winter meant trouble or foolishness, usually both. Bryn lifted his chin in the direction of the pilot boat. "You should go." Osric nodded once. He moved without hurry, because hurry belonged to those who had not learned what the sea did to hurried men. He reached the pilot boat, checked the oars, and felt the rope lines. He touched the lead line, coiled and ready. The lead line was a length of rope with a weight of lead at the end, used to sound the depth. It was simple and honest. It did not care about reputations. Ida followed him down the pier. Her eyes scanned the horizon, then flicked up to the cliff again. "If Wulf sees that sail, he will light the beacon." "If he sees it," Osric said. Ida gave him a look. "Wulf sees everything that agrees with his preferences." Osric smiled faintly, then put his foot in the boat. The harbour water was choppy even inside the wall. The tide tugged like an impatient child. 2 rowers from the fishing crews stepped in behind him. They did not ask. They knew the routine. In Greyhaven you helped when it was time to help, and later you pretended you had always intended to. The boat slid out, the oars dipping in rhythm. The harbour sounds faded into the hiss of wind and the slap of water against wood. Osric kept his gaze steady on the approaching sail. As they passed the mouth of the harbour, the sea opened wider. The swell lifted the pilot boat, then set it down again. The rowers breathed steadily, pulling through cold water that tried to steal heat with every splash. Osric watched the ship. It was a broad-hulled trader, not a war vessel, with a square sail that sagged slightly under damp wind. It should have been in shelter before dusk. It should have been wise enough to wait offshore. It was doing neither. A gust came sharp and sudden. The sail snapped. The ship yawed, turning a fraction toward Raven Reef. Osric clicked his tongue. He raised an arm, signalling. The rowers pulled harder. Behind them, on Beacon Cliff, a small movement caught his eye. Smoke, thin and uncertain, began to rise. Wulf had seen the ship after all, or he had smelled the trouble and decided to bless the world with his presence. The smoke thickened, then the first lick of flame appeared as Stormwood woke. The beacon fire did not roar, it did not show off. It burned with the steady seriousness of a tool being used for its purpose. Osric felt a small easing in his chest. The beacon meant a point of reference, a promise of guidance. It also meant Wulf would now consider himself involved in every decision that followed. The pilot boat climbed a swell and dipped into the trough. Osric kept his eyes on the trader. He could make out figures on its deck, moving like dark shapes against wet wood. Then he saw something else. Farther out, beyond the trader, a faint light flickered on the horizon. It was too low, too unstable, and too distant to be Stormwood. It was not a star. It was on the water. Osric frowned. Another ship, perhaps, or a fishing boat with a lamp, or something less sensible. In winter, the sea collected less sensible things. He forced his attention back to the trader. One problem at a time, he told himself, because that was how you stayed alive. The sea always offered a second problem, sometimes a third. It was generous that way. The pilot boat drew near the trader's starboard side. Osric stood, timing the rise and fall, then grabbed a rope and hauled himself up with the ease of a man who had done it too many times. The deck was slick. The air smelled of damp wool, tar, and worry. The captain met him with a face that tried to look confident. He was not a young man, but he carried himself like someone who believed age should provide immunity from consequences. His beard was wet, his eyes sharp.
"You are late,"
Osric said calmly. The captain bristled. The wind was against us. Osric looked at the sea. The wind is always against someone. The captain did not appreciate that. He waved toward the harbour, where the beacon now burned. "We saw your light. We came." Osric glanced back. Stormwood was steady, but the air between cliff and sea was thickening with mist. The channel into Greyhaven was narrow, marked by rocks and shifting sand. In clear weather it was manageable. In winter gloom it was a test of patience and nerve. Osric stepped to the rail and lowered the lead line, letting the weight fall, then pulling it up and reading the wet marks by touch. The depth was not wrong, but it was not comforting. The captain spoke again, leaning closer. "We have cloth, salt, and barrels of ale. We need shelter." Osric nodded. "You will have shelter if you follow my words." The captain's mouth tightened. "We will follow them, within reason." Osric looked at him, expression mild. "The sea does not care about your reason." The captain opened his mouth to argue, then another gust hit and the ship lurched. The rail bit into Osric's palm. He steadied himself and listened to the hull, to the waves, to the rhythm beneath the panic. He cast another glance toward the distant flicker on the horizon. It was still there, wavering like a nervous thought. Too far to address now, too strange to ignore later. Osric drew a breath that tasted of salt and smoke. He lifted his hand, signaling to the helmsman. "Bring her head a little south, slow and steady. Follow the beacon, not your pride." The captain muttered something under his breath that the wind stole away. Osric did not mind. The wind was doing useful work for once. As the trader began to turn toward the harbour mouth, the storm clouds thickened. Dusk was coming, and out on the horizon, that other light flickered again, as if watching. Chapter 2. A pilot rose into weather. The first rule of winter work on the North Sea was simple. Nothing was ever finished. You brought a ship in, and the sea immediately began arranging the next difficulty. Greyhaven did not have the luxury of believing that one successful landing meant safety. It meant only that you had not yet made your mistake. Osric stayed aboard the trader as it approached the harbour mouth. The beacon on Stormwood burned steady, but fog was creeping in from the east, sliding along the water like a quiet animal. The channel into Greyhaven was marked by knowledge, not posts. A few stones stood at low tide, but in high water they vanished. You navigated by the line of the cliff, the break in the sand, the colour of the water, the feel of the swell, and the lead line, always the lead line. The captain kept glancing toward the harbour as if staring could widen it. His crew moved with tense purpose, adjusting lines, checking the sail, shifting cargo weight. They were not fools. They were simply tired, wet, and following a man who believed boldness was a method. Osric lowered the lead line again. The lead came up with a smear of grit, not shell. Sandbar, he thought. It was closer than expected. He spoke to the helmsman, calm and clear. "Bring her a touch to port. Slow. Let the sea do the work, do not fight it." The helmsman obeyed. The captain watched Osric with suspicion. People who trusted themselves rarely liked people who were actually useful. Behind them, the pilot boat followed, rowed by the two fishermen who had brought Osric out. They kept close enough to be seen, far enough not to be crushed if the trader rolled. They were brave in the way of men who had already decided it was too late to be scared. The trader reached the harbour mouth. The sea changed there, confused by the wall and the shallows. Waves rose at odd angles, striking the bow, then sliding along the hull. Spray hit Osric's face cold enough to sting. On the cliff, Wulf was doing what Wulf did best, which was being present in a way that demanded appreciation. He had built the fire high and fed it with dry wood. The flame leaned in the wind, but it did not fail. Smoke streamed downwind, trailing like a banner. It would be comforting if smoke could be trusted to remain consistent, but smoke had its own ambitions. Osric watched the beacon carefully. In clear conditions, the fire was a guide. In fog, it could be a liar. Light in mist bent and bloomed, shifting where it appeared to sit. It was a cruel trick, as if the air itself had learned sarcasm. As the trader edged inward, Osric saw the first sign that the night would not be easy. A second glow appeared to the north, low on the water, faint and uneven. It was closer now than it had been earlier. The same flicker he had seen on the horizon, now drawing nearer with stubborn intent. He stared. It was not the beacon. It was not a star. It was a lamp or a small fire carried on a vessel. The captain noticed his gaze and followed it. "Another ship," he said, sounding relieved. "Then we are not the last fools." Osric did not answer right away. "That light is too low." "Too low for what?" "Too low to be where it is," Osric said. "And too steady to be drifting wreckage." The captain shrugged. "Not our concern." Osric looked at him. "Everything near a harbour is our concern." The captain opened his mouth, but the trader's bow dipped into a trough and the deck tilted. He grabbed a line and held on. The sea had opinions about conversation. Osric returned to the immediate task. He sounded again. The depth held, then lessened by a small, meaningful amount. The sandbar was shifting, as sandbars always did, because sand enjoyed moving more than it enjoyed being useful. Osric spoke, measured and firm. "Hold this line. Keep the bow into the swell. Do not let her swing." The helmsman nodded, sweat and rain mixing on his brow. The trader inched forward. Greyhaven's harbour wall rose ahead, dark stone slick with spray. The gap at the mouth was narrow, and inside it the water calmed only slightly. Beyond, the piers waited like tired arms. Osric could hear shouts from the docks. Men were readying ropes, hauling on lines, preparing to catch and guide. Ida stood near the pierhead, her shawl wrapped tight, watching with eyes that missed nothing. Bryn Hale stood beside her, hands behind his back as if the whole operation were a paperwork matter. The trader crossed the threshold into the harbour. The wind dropped a fraction. The waves shortened. The ship's motion became less violent and more complicated. Now it was currents and eddies tugging at the hull. Osric listened and adjusted, using the lead line more often than the captain liked. The captain finally spoke again, his voice sharp. "We are in." "We are not done," Osric said. The captain snorted. "Always more rules, always more water," Osric replied. The trader came alongside the main pier. Ropes flew. Hands caught them. Men hauled and tied with practiced speed. The hull bumped once against the fenders, then settled. The ship was secured, creaking and dripping like a creature brought into a stable. Osric stepped down to the pier, his boots hitting wet wood. Ida was there, holding a coil of rope as if it were an extension of her will. She looked at Osric's face, then past him toward the sea. "You saw it too," she said quietly. Osric nodded. A light offshore. Bryn Hale leaned in, his voice careful in the way of a man who did not like uncertainty. "Another ship?" "Maybe," Osric said. "Or a small boat." "A small boat in this weather," Bryn murmured. "That is ambitious." Ida's mouth tightened. "Or desperate." Osric looked toward the harbour mouth. Fog thickened beyond the wall, blurring the sea into a flat darkness. The distant light flickered again, now closer and slightly to the north of the channel line. Wulf's beacon burned above, its glow swelling in the mist. If that offshore light belonged to someone trying to find Greyhaven, they might mistake Stormward's position in the fog. They might steer wrong, drawn to the brighter blur instead of the true line of the channel. Osric felt the familiar weight settle in his chest. Not panic, but responsibility. It was heavy and boring and unavoidable. He turned to the fishermen who had rowed out with him. "Get the pilot boat ready again." One of them blinked. "Again?" Osric gave a faint, tired smile. "The sea is generous." Bryn frowned. "We have one ship safely in. Let the other find its own sense." Osric looked at him steadily. "That other light is already near Raven Reefed. If they drift there, the sea will make the decision for them." Ida spoke, her voice calm but edged. "And the sea does not fill out a request, remember." Bryn did not like being reminded of his earlier conversation, but he was not a fool. He nodded once. "I will have ropes and men ready." Osric headed toward the pilot boat. The rowers climbed in with the resigned patience of people who understood that winter did not respect bedtime. The boat slid out again. The harbour mouth swallowed them. Fog wrapped around the water, thinning and thickening in slow pulses. The beacon's glow became a pale smear above the cliff. Osric guided by sound and feel. He listened to the surf breaking farther out. He watched the faint outline of the wall as they passed beyond it. He kept his breathing slow and even. The rowers pulled steady, their oars dipping into water that felt thicker in the cold. As they cleared the harbour mouth, the offshore light came into clearer view, though clear was a generous word. It was a lamp on a small vessel, likely a trading skiff or fishing boat riding low. It moved unevenly, as if the person handling it was more hopeful than skilled. Osric raised his hand and called out, his voice carrying over the wind, "Ho there!" The light wavered, then steadied. A voice answered, strained. "Who is that?" "Greyhaven pilot," Osric called. "Hold your line. Do not turn north." A pause, then the voice again, defiant and shaky. "We are aiming for the beacon." Osric's jaw tightened. "That is exactly the problem." He rowed closer. The vessel emerged from the fog, small and overcrowded, its gunwales close to the water. 2 men were aboard, and a woman, all hunched in wet cloaks. Their lamp was shielded by a piece of wood, trying and failing to keep the flame alive. Their faces were pale with cold. Osric kept his tone calm, because fear spread faster than fog. "You are too far north. The beacon looks closer than it is. The channel is south of you." The man holding the lamp frowned. "We followed the light." Osric nodded, and the light followed the fog. "That is how it works." The woman in the boat spoke, her voice tight. "We cannot row much longer. Our hands are numb." Osric looked at their boat. The oars were short, poorly balanced. The craft was taking spray and sitting low. If they tried to row across the swell toward the harbour mouth without guidance, they could be pushed onto Raven Reef. The reef was not dramatic. It was not a towering, jagged monster. It was worse. It was a hidden line of broken rock that waited for hulls and did not care who owned them. Osric signalled to his rowers, "Come alongside." They eased the pilot boat close. Osric spoke again, clear and firm. "Tie your bowline to us. We will tow you south, then in." The lampman hesitated. "We can handle our own boat." Osric let a small note of dry amusement enter his voice. "That is an excellent belief to have when you are warm and safe. At the moment it is less impressive." The woman gave the man a look that could have cut rope. He swallowed his pride and threw a line. Osric caught it and tied fast. The tow began. The pilot boat pulled, its rowers breathing hard, their backs rising and falling with each stroke. The small vessel followed, bobbing and slapping. Osric kept his eyes on the water, watching for the change in swell that marked the edge of the channel. Fog pressed in. The beacon's glow swelled and shifted. Osric resisted the urge to stare at it. Instead, he trusted the lead line. He lowered it, let it drop, hauled it up, and read the depth. He did it again and again. The depth decreased. He adjusted course slightly south. The depth increased again. The channel was there, narrow as a promise. A gust hit from the north, stronger than the earlier ones. The small vessel yawed. The tow line snapped tight. For a moment the pilot boat was dragged sideways. Osric barked a quick command to his rowers, "Pull together, keep her straight." They obeyed. The pilot boat corrected, cutting into the swell. The tow line eased. The lamp flickered dangerously, then steadied. The man holding it cursed, a short ugly sound swallowed by wind. Osric did not scold him. Winter provided enough lessons without extra speech. At last the harbour wall emerged from the fog, dark and solid. The sound of surf softened slightly, replaced by the echo of waves striking stone. Osric felt the shift in water as they reached the mouth. He called back to the small vessel. "Hold steady. Do not try to steer yet," the woman answered, her voice thinner now. "We are holding." They crossed into the harbour. The sea calmed by degrees, not kindly but enough. The tow line slackened. Osric turned his head and saw figures on the pier, lanterns in hand. Ida was there, of course. Brynhale was there too, standing as if he had simply planned this rescue in advance. Wulf's beacon burned above, stubborn and bright, as if it were trying to pretend it had done all the work. Osric guided the pilot boat toward the pier. Men threw ropes, hands caught them. The small vessel was brought alongside, trembling with relief and cold. The woman climbed onto the pier first. Her knees buckled, but Ida caught her arm and steadied her without fuss. The two men followed, shivering, their pride finally quiet. Brynhale stepped forward, voice carefully neutral. "You will report your arrival and your cargo." One of the men stared at him, then at the harbour around him, then at the fog outside the wall. He spoke slowly. "We have no cargo, we have letters." Bryn blinked. "Letters." The man nodded, lips blue. "For York, for the Priory, for anyone who still pretends paper is stronger than water." Osric felt a small prick of interest. Letters in winter, delivered by a boat that nearly vanished on Raven Reef. That meant someone wanted something badly, or feared something worse. Ida looked at Osric, her eyes steady. "You will want to see those letters." Osric nodded. "Not tonight," he said softly. "Tonight they need warmth." Ida gave a faint smile. "Listen to the pilot, Bryn. He occasionally says sensible things." Bryn sighed, as if generosity were a personal burden. "Fine. Get them inside. We will sort the rest tomorrow." Osric watched as Ida led the shivering trio toward the shed with the lamp and the mending nets. The warm circle of light would hold them for a while. It would not solve every problem. It would not stop the sea. But it would remind them that they were not alone in the dark. Osric turned back toward the harbour mouth. Fog still pressed outside. The North Sea breathed and shifted, restless beyond the wall. Stormwood's beacon burned above, bright and stubborn, and somewhere in that fog, the sea kept its next opinion ready. Chapter 3: Nets by Lamplight and Bad Advice. Morning in Greyhaven arrived the way it always did in winter, without enthusiasm. The sky was low and grey, the water was darker than the sky, and the wind was already awake and annoyed. The harbour looked calmer than the night before, but only because everything was too tired to move quickly. Osric Pike slept for a few hours in a small room above the net shed, because walking home would have required extra courage, and he did not see the point in wasting it. When he woke, he listened for the sounds that told him whether the harbour was behaving. He heard gulls arguing, ropes creaking, and a man coughing in the next room like he was trying to cough up the entire North Sea. It was familiar music. He went down the steps and into the shed. Ida Thorne was already there, seated by the lamp, needle in hand. She had a way of appearing at work before anyone else believed time had started. "You slept," she said, not looking up. Osric poured water into a cup, because pretending it was tea was a harmless lie. "I rested." Ida made a small sound that meant she approved of the lie. "The letter people are awake." Osric looked toward the back of the shed where the three soaked travellers sat wrapped in blankets. Their faces were less blue now, though still pale. The woman sat upright, alert, as if warmth had made her more dangerous. "Brynhale is looking for them," Ida added. "He is excited about paperwork." Osric nodded. "That is his winter sport." The travellers had brought no cargo, only letters. That had sounded ridiculous at midnight and suspicious in the morning. In a world where everything was carried by foot or sail, letters were ordinary. In winter, letters carried in a half-drowned boat were not ordinary at all. Osric stepped closer. "How are you?" The lampman, whose name turned out to be Wulf Markham, cleared his throat. "Warmer. Still unhappy." "That is the correct response," Osric said. You are learning local manners." The other man, a thin fellow with anxious eyes, introduced himself as Taran Reed. He kept glancing toward the harbour mouth as if the fog might come back inside. The woman spoke last, her voice steady. "My name is Ellen Harrow. The letters are for the priory at Farne and for a merchant in York. Also for Father Alden here, if he still lives." Ida raised her eyebrows. "Father Alden lives. He is stubborn." Osric felt the hairs rise on his arms, not from cold. Father Alden was the monk in Greyhaven who kept records, tended a small chapel, and quietly knew everyone's business. He also had a habit of collecting old coastal notes and scraps of navigation lore, which made him either wise or suspicious depending on the day. Elin reached into a leather pouch and pulled out a wrapped bundle of wax-sealed packets. She held them carefully, like something that might bite. "We were told to bring these by sea because the roads are not safe." "Not safe how?" Ida asked, still stitching. Elin hesitated, then chose her words like she had practiced them. Too many men on the tracks, too many questions, too many missing travellers. Osric kept his face calm. He did not like fear that spread fast. He preferred fear that stayed quiet and useful. "Who told you?" "A clerk in York," Elin said. "A man named Edwin Lark. He said we would be paid if we reached Greyhaven and found Alden." Osric nodded slowly. "Paid enough to row into winter." Elin gave a small, tight smile. "Paid enough to try." Brynhale arrived as if summoned by the word paid. He stepped into the shed, shook rain off his cloak, and looked around with the satisfied expression of a man entering his natural habitat, which was a room where someone owed him answers. He saw the travellers and immediately began speaking. Names, origins, purpose, and any goods to declare. Ida did not stop stitching. "They have letters and bad judgment." Bryn ignored her, because he was used to ignoring accurate summaries. Elin stood and offered the bundle. "These are for Father Alden and the priory at Farne, also for York." Bryn frowned. "Also for York. That is not helpful. York is not in my harbour." Osric stepped between them. "The priory is close enough. Alden will know what to do." Bryn looked displeased, then more displeased. "Father Alden knows too much." Ida glanced up. "That is why you visit him when you pretend you do not." Bryn sighed and took the bundle as if it might stain his hands. "Fine, I will go to him." "Osric, there is also a meeting." Osric closed his eyes briefly. "A meeting." Bryn nodded, grim. "The fishermen are complaining, the merchants are complaining, Wulf Rowan is complaining loudly. I am forced to host them like a winter feast." Ida spoke gently. "Try not to unalive anyone with boredom." Bryn did not laugh. He did not understand humour unless it came with a stamp. "Meet at the dock hall before midday. You will attend." Osric watched him leave, letters in hand, shoulders stiff. Bryn was not cruel. He was simply committed to the belief that order could solve nature. Nature found that belief adorable. When Bryn was gone, Osric turned back to the travellers. "You will stay here until you are steady. Ida will feed you something hot." Ida said, "I will feed them something hot if they promise not to faint into my nets." Ellen nodded once. "We will try to remain upright." Osric left the shed and walked along the pier toward the dock hall. The harbour was busy. Men hauled lines, scraped hulls, and shouted the same instructions they always shouted. A few merchants watched their cargo with the jealous affection of people who trusted barrels more than neighbours. Stormward still burned on the cliff, though lower now because Wulf believed a fire should remain on duty until he personally dismissed it. Smoke drifted thin and steady. It gave the illusion of control. Inside the dock hall the air smelled of wet wool, fish and old wood. A fire burned in a stone hearth, more for morale than warmth. Brynhale stood at the front, flanked by two scribes who looked like they wished to be anywhere else. Wulf Rowan sat near the fire with the posture of a man prepared to defend his fire's honour in court. Several fishermen sat with arms crossed. Two merchants stood with tight faces, as if the room itself were trying to steal their profit. Osric arrived and took a place near the wall. He preferred edges. Edges allowed escape. Bryn began. "We will address the matter of last night." A fisherman named Hob Crane spoke first, because fishermen believed whoever spoke loudest became correct. "The beacon was late. We saw that trader drift toward Raven Reese. If the beacon had been lit sooner, we would not have risked it. Wulf's eyes narrowed. The beacon is not a toy you light because you feel nervous. It is lit when needed. Hob spread his hands. It was needed. Wulf leaned forward. Needed by whom? By you or by the sea? A merchant, Rolf Grey, stepped in with a smooth voice that belonged to a man who could sell you your own boots. We are all grateful for the beacon, truly, but the harbour depends on clear signals. If ships cannot trust Greyhaven, they will go elsewhere. Ida was not there, but Osric could hear her imaginary response anyway. Go elsewhere, then. Bryn rubbed his forehead. The issue is not gratitude, the issue is practice. Wulf, you saw the ship and lit the beacon. Wulf sniffed. I did, and it burned well. Osric spoke quietly from the ward. It did, but light in fog bends, it can mislead. We nearly had another vessel drawn north. The room shifted. Some men frowned, some leaned in. Bryn looked sharply at Osric. Another vessel. Osric nodded. A small boat. Letters, no cargo. We towed them in. Hobcrane muttered, so now we are rescuing paper. Rolf Grey smiled thinly. Paper carries contracts, contracts carry coin. Wulf looked offended. If they followed my beacon wrong, that is their fault. Osric met his gaze. It is not fault that matters when the sea is deciding. It is what happens next. Bryn held up a hand. Enough. We cannot change the sea. We can change our signals. Wulf, your beacon must use agreed patterns when fog rises. 1 steady burn for harbour open, 2 short lifts of the fire for danger north, 3 for danger south. Wulf's face tightened as if Bryn had asked him to sing in public. My fire is not a puppet. Bryn's voice hardened. Your fire is a tool. Greyhaven's safety is not a matter of your moods. Wulf looked like he might argue, then remembered he was in a room full of people who had seen ships nearly grounded. He grunted. Fine, patterns. But I will decide when fog is fog. Osric spoke again. We can decide by the sound of surf on Raven Reef. If it grows louder than the harbour wall can soften it, fog is near. Several fishermen nodded. They trusted sound more than rules. Rolf Grey cleared his throat. And what of pilot fees? We paid last month and still nearly lost our hull. Osric kept his tone flat. You paid for guidance, you received it. You also received winter. Winter is free. A few fishermen chuckled. Rolf did not. Bryn moved quickly before sarcasm became a fight. Fees are unchanged. The pilot saves ships. That is the arrangement. The meeting continued, full of complaints that circled like gulls. Osric listened, spoke when needed, and let the rest wash past him. He was about to leave when the dock hall door opened and Father Alden walked in. Father Alden was not old in years, but he carried himself like a man who had been tired for decades. His robe was damp at the hem, and his hands were ink-stained. He held the bundle of letters Bryn had delivered, now opened and spread like wings. He looked at the room and spoke in a voice that did not need shouting. We have trouble. Bryn straightened. What kind? Alden lifted one letter. A kind that travels on roads and asks questions. Rolf Grey frowned. That could be any traveller. Alden gave him a look that suggested he had survived more clever men than this. It says men are watching the coastal tracks. It says certain ships are being followed. It says Greyhaven is being asked about beacons and pilots. Wulf bristled. Asked by whom? Alden turned another letter. By men who claim they serve a lord inland. They say they want to reduce smuggling. They say many things. Osric felt the room tighten. Trouble inland was usually none of Greyhaven's business, but trouble that asked about beacons was different. Beacons were meant to save lives. They could also guide less honest purposes. A false fire could lure a ship. A friendly pilot could be pressured. Ida's words returned in his mind. The sea does not fill out a request. Men did, and men were worse. Bryn spoke carefully. What do they want? Alden folded the letter and tucked it away. They want control, and they want it before spring, Wulf muttered. They can control their own hearth, not my fire. Alden continued. There is also an older note, from Farne. About a second beacon line used long ago, farther south, in case Stormwood is obscured. Osric leaned forward. A second line. Where? Alden looked at him. I will show you. Tonight. When I can find the right record. It is buried under a pile of records that I assure Bryn insists are organised. Bryn opened his mouth to protest. Alden raised a hand. Bryn, do not. Bryn closed his mouth. He looked like a man who had been defeated by years of experience. Osric felt the shape of a plan forming, not comfortable but necessary. If someone was asking about their signals, Greyhaven needed signals that could not be easily copied or twisted. If there was an older route, they needed to know it. He spoke softly, but the room heard him anyway. Tonight, I will go with Alden to find the note. Tomorrow we test the old line at dusk. Rolf Grey frowned. Testing costs time. Osric looked at him. Being wrong costs ships. Rolf did not argue. He preferred profit to pride, but he understood risk. Bryn nodded slowly. Fine, test it. But if anyone lights a second fire without my approval, I will personally haunt them. Wulf grunted. Try it. The meeting ended with the usual sound of men leaving while pretending they had won. Osric walked back to the net shed as the day dimmed. Winter afternoons were brief, like favours. Inside the shed, Ida was still stitching. The travellers were quieter, sipping something hot. Ilyn watched Osric come in and held his gaze. They will come, she said. Osric nodded, yes. Ida did not look up. So, we make a better plan before they arrive. Osric sat near the lamp, warmth on his hands, and felt the quiet weight of responsibility settle in again. Outside, the harbour worked. Above, the beacon burned. Somewhere inland, men asked question. Somewhere offshore, the sea waited. Chapter 4. The Longship That Wouldn't Admit, Which Was Lost. Dusk in Greyhaven was a slow closing of a heavy lid. The sky darkened first at the edges, then everywhere. The wind cooled, then cooled again, as if it enjoyed repeating itself. On the water, the last light turned every wave into a moving piece of dull metal. Osric met Father Alden at the chapel door. The chapel was small, stone-walled, and smelled of wax and damp books. Alden carried a lantern and a bundle of rolled parchment tied with string. He looked like a man preparing to argue with history. You found it? Osric asked. Alden nodded. I found something. Whether it will behave as a map is another matter. Ida joined them a moment later, shawl tight, hair tucked away. She did not ask permission to come, she simply arrived, the way competence often did. Alden eyed her. This is a pilot matter. Ida smiled faintly. It is a harbour matter. Also, you will need someone to tell you when your map is being dramatic. Alden sighed. Fair. They walked along the cliff path toward a low outcrop south of Stormwood. The wind pressed from the sea. Far below, the harbour glowed with small lamps. Men moved like dark shapes. The beacon fire was lower now, but still lit, because Wulf Rowan would rather starve than let his fire look lazy. Alden unrolled the parchment under the lantern light. It was a coastal note, not a grand chart, with a rough line of cliff and marks that suggested hazards. Beside the marks were words in a careful hand. Osric leaned close. The ink was faded but readable. It described an older approach, a line of reference points that could be used when Stormwood's glow was distorted by fog. It used a southern marker, a small stone stack known as Candle Rock, and a signal lantern hung from a beam on a fisher hut at Saltwick Sands. Ida's eyes narrowed. Saltwick is not exactly cooperative ground. The tide eats it. Alden nodded. Which is why it is useful. No inland lord will bother controlling it. They will not even bother walking there. Osric traced the note with a finger. Candle Rock, then line up with the cleft in Beacon Cliff, then keep Raven Reef to the left, not by sight but by sound. Alden looked pleased. You understand it. Osric smiled faintly. I prefer instructions that involve listening. People lie, rocks do not. Ida looked out over the sea. We can hang a lantern at Saltwick tonight. Osric nodded. We test at dusk, as planned. Alden hesitated. There is one more thing. Osric looked at him. Alden pointed to a small note at the bottom of the parchment. It mentions false fires. It says there were winters when someone lit a fire north of Raven Reef to lure ships onto the rocks. Not for unaliving, it says, but for taking the goods after. Ida exhaled slowly. That is cheerful. Osric felt his jaw tighten. He had suspected as much. Winter made honest work hard and dishonest work tempting. Alden rolled the parchment again. That is why this note was kept. It is a reminder that the worst weather sometimes wears boots. They returned down the cliff path. The harbour was louder now. Shouts, running feet, the thump of wood. Osric's instinct sharpened. Activity at dusk meant a ship. At the pier head, Bryn Hale stood with a lantern raised, scanning the outer water. Wulf was there too, as if he had been born on that pier. Several fishermen held ropes ready. Bryn turned when he saw Osric. Another vessel. Osric stepped beside him and looked out. Beyond the harbour wall, a shape moved through the dim, long and narrow, riding the swells with a sleek confidence. A longship. It was not the first longship Greyhaven had seen. Coastal trade and raiding had come and gone over the years like bad habits, but this one was different. Its sail was partly lowered, its oars out, and its approach was careful. That did not mean friendly. It meant the crew wanted control. The ship's prow rose and fell, cutting the water with a quiet grace. Along its sides, shields were strapped in a line, more decoration than threat in this moment, but still a statement. Ida stood beside Osric, eyes steady. They are close enough to want shelter. Bryn's voice was tight, and bold enough to ask for it. Wulf snorted. If they come in, my beacon will not be blamed for whatever their pride does. Osric watched the longship's angle. They were a little north, edging toward the wrong water. Fog was not thick tonight, but darkness itself could mislead. Osric spoke calmly. "Ready the pilot boat," a fisherman muttered. Again. Osric nodded. Again. The pilot boat slid out. 2 rowers took the oars. Osric stood at the bow, lantern in hand, shielding the flame with his body. Ida stepped in behind him without comment. Osric glanced back at her. "This is not a net," Ida replied. "I know, but it is still a problem with holes." He accepted that and turned forward. The pilot boat crossed the harbour mouth and met the swell. The longship loomed closer, its oars dipping in perfect rhythm. The crew moved as son, which was impressive and slightly annoying. A man at the longship's stern stood taller than the rest, hands on the steering oar. His cloak was dark, his hair tied back. Even at distance, he looked like someone who expected the world to make room. Osric raised his lantern and called, "Hold your line. You are north of the channel." The longship slowed. The tall man called back, his voice carrying, "We are where we choose to be." Ida leaned slightly toward Osric. That is a strong opening line for a man in winter water. Osric kept his voice even. "The sea will choose for you if you do not listen." The longship drifted closer. The tall man looked down at Osric as if looking down was part of his job. "Who are you?" "Osric Pike, harbour pilot." The tall man nodded once, as if accepting a minor fact. "I am Harrick Stone. We seek shelter and fresh water." Osric studied him. Harrick sounded like a coastal name, old but workable for TTS. His crew wore wool and leather, practical, not ceremonial. They looked tired, that was good. Tired men were less likely to become dramatic. Osric spoke. "You may enter if you follow my lead. Greyhaven is narrow, it does not care how sleek your ship is." Harrick's mouth twitched. "It is a good ship." Osric nodded. "Good ships still meet rocks." Harrick looked toward the harbour. The beacon burned above. He tilted his head slightly, suspicious. "Your fire is high." Wulf would have enjoyed hearing that. Osric answered, "It is our signal. It is not a promise of easy water." Harrick said, "We do not fear water." Ida spoke before Osric could. "That is a pity, because water does not respect bravery." A pause. Then, to Osric's surprise, Harrick smiled. Not warmly, but with interest, as if he had met someone who might be worth listening to. Osric used the moment. "Your bow is near Raven Reef's pull. Turn a touch south. Slow. Let your oars match the swell." Harrick gave a short command in his own tongue, then repeated it in rough English for Osric's benefit, which was polite and faintly insulting at the same time. The longship adjusted. Its oars slowed. The hull shifted, nose easing south. Osric lowered the lead line from the pilot boat and read the depth. He guided by it, by the sound of surf, by the shape of the swells. Ida held the lantern steady, her hands calm, her eyes watching both water and men. The longship followed. It moved with a controlled grace that made Osric respect the crew's skill. It also made him wary, because skill combined with pride could become trouble. As they neared the harbour mouth, a gust rose and pushed cold air down like a hand. A line of darker cloud moved from the north, low and thick. Ida saw it too. Another storm. Osric nodded. Not tonight, perhaps, but soon. The longship crossed into the harbour. Its motion changed, the waves shortening, the currents tugging. Herrick's crew adjusted without fuss. They were used to narrow places. They did not panic. That was also good. On the pier, Bryn Hale stood ready, face stiff. Wulf Rowan stood behind him, arms crossed, as if he could intimidate the sea by posture alone. Osric guided the longship alongside the outer pier, not the main merchant pier. He did not want them too deep in the harbour until he knew their intentions. The longship settled, ropes thrown, tied fast. Herrick stepped onto the pier. He moved like a man stepping onto land that owed him respect. Bryn Hale greeted him with the careful tone of a man balancing diplomacy and dislike. "You will state your business and your number." Herrick looked at him, then at the harbour. His eyes flicked to Stormwood's beacon, then to the nets hanging near the shed. He spoke with measured calm. "We are travellers, we have trade goods, we have silver, we have tired arms, we ask for a night." Bryn replied, "Greyhaven is not a free haul." Herrick nodded. "Neither is my ship." Osric stepped in. "You may stay if you keep peace and follow harbour rules." Herrick's gaze returned to Osric. "Your rules," Osric corrected gently. "The harbour's rules." Harry considered, then nodded once. "Fine." Ida watched his crew. They stayed near their ship, not spreading into the town. That suggested caution, not conquest. Still, caution could be a mask. Bryn motioned toward the dock hall. "We will speak further." Herrick followed, 2 crewmen behind him. Osric and Ida trailed, and Father Alden joined them, lantern still in hand. Alden looked more alert than a man should look after sunset. Letters and old notes had stirred his mind. Inside the dock hall, Bryn offered Herrick a bench. Herrick sat, posture straight. Bryn began questions about origin and destination. Herrick answered politely but not fully. He spoke of northern coasts, of a route that had turned rough, of a desire to reach south before deeper winter. Alden watched him closely, then spoke. "Did you see fires on the coast north of Raven Reef?" Herrick's eyes flicked to Alden. "Yes." Alden kept his voice calm. "Real fires, or false ones?" Herrick hesitated. Then he said, "Fires that were not on cliffs. Fires low. Fires that moved." Osric felt a chill that was not only weather. Those were not beacons. Those were boats. Or traps. Ida spoke softly. "How many?" Herrick lifted a hand. 2, maybe 3. In fog, numbers become opinions. Alden nodded slowly. So the old note is still alive. Bryn looked between them, frustrated. "Explain." Osric spoke. "Someone may be lighting false signals to pull ships wrong, or watching our coast. We received letters that men inland are asking about our beacon." Herrick leaned forward slightly. "Inland men? Why would inland men care about coastal fires?" Ida answered, "Because they want what ships carry without paying for it." Herrick's mouth tightened. "That is familiar." Bryn's face hardened. "Greyhaven will not be using." Wulf Rowan, who had been silent for nearly a full minute and was clearly suffering, spoke sharply. "No one uses my fire." Ida glanced at him. "Your fire is a torch in a storm, Wulf. Anyone can look at it." Wulf glared. "Not anyone can tend it." Osric held up a hand. "Enough. The storm line is coming. We need a plan." Bryn asked, "What plan?" Osric answered, "We test the old southern marker, Candle Rock and the Saltwick Lantern. We keep Stormward, but we add a second reference that only our people know." Alden nodded. "I can prepare the Saltwick Lantern point tonight." Ida said, "I will go. Saltwick sands will try to swallow your boots. I am used to it." Osric looked at her. "You do not have to." Ida gave him a level look. "Osric, the sea does not care who has to. It cares who shows up." Harrick watched them, then spoke quietly. If there are false fires, they may return. They may come close. Osric nodded. Yes. Harrick added, My crew can keep watch on the outer water. We are awake anyway. Sleep is for summers. Bryn eyed him. Why would you help? Harrick met his gaze. Because if false fires pull ships onto rocks, they will also pull mine. And because I prefer to choose my troubles. Ida murmured, a reasonable philosophy, considering the alternatives. The hall fell into a brief silence. Outside, wind rose again, as if the coast had been listening and decided to participate. Osric stood. We will hang the lantern at Saltwick tonight. We will agree on signals. We will keep watch for low fires. And we will try not to pretend pride is a compass. Wulf muttered, Pride points norths. Ida replied, That explains a lot. They moved out into the night, lanterns swinging, breath visible in cold air. Above them, Stormwood's beacon burned, steady and stubborn. Farther north, beyond Raven Reef, the sea was dark and full of possible lights. Greyhaven did not have the luxury of being surprised. It only had the choice of being ready. Chapter 5: The Monks of Farne and the Reluctant Map. Saltwick Sands was a place that looked innocent only because it was flat. Flat ground made people overconfident. It made them think they could see danger coming. Saltwick punished that kind of thinking by moving when you were not watching. Ida Thorne walked there with a lantern hooded under her cloak, boots sinking into wet sand that pretended to be firm. Father Alden followed with a bundle of rope and a small brass lamp that he treated like a sacred object. Osric Pike came behind them, carrying the calm patience of a man who had spent too many nights explaining the same tide twice. The wind had backed slightly west, which meant the cold felt sharper. Stormwood burned on Beacon Cliff behind them, a steady glow that looked reliable until fog decided otherwise. The Longship lay tied at the outer pier, its crew keeping watch with quiet discipline. Harrick Stone had offered help without acting generous about it, which was the best kind of help. Alden stopped at the edge of Saltwick and stared out over the dark water. Somewhere out there sat Farne Isle, low and stony, with a small priory that kept to itself and to its prayers. Alden's letters had said the priory knew something about older beacon lines. Priories knew many things, mostly because people talked around them as if walls could not listen. Ida pointed to a fisher hut, half collapsed, its timbers black with old pitch. There. Osric nodded. The note said a lantern hung from a beam there. Alden sighed. The note was written by a man who did not have to keep lanterns lit in winter. Ida walked to the hut and tested the beam with a shove. It held, barely, like a stubborn old man refusing to admit weakness. She tied the rope around it in a neat knot, then looked back at Alden. Hand me the lamp. Alden passed it over with the seriousness of a ceremony. Ida hooked it to the rope and hauled it up until it hung at head height, a steady point above the sand. The flame inside wavered, then steadied behind its glass. Osric stepped back and studied the line of sight. From the sea, a ship could use that lantern and candle rock as a second reference. It would be low, not like Stormward, and that was the point. False fires tempted ships by being low. This one would be low but known. Alden rubbed his hands together. Now we see if anyone notices. Ida lifted her chin toward the northern water. If someone is watching, they already notice Stormward. They will notice anything new. Osric listened to the surf. Raven Reef was north of the channel line, hidden in darkness. But you could hear it when the swell rose. You could hear water breaking wrong. Rocks made a different kind of noise than open sea. Rocks were honest about their mood. Alden pulled the parchment note from his cloak and unrolled it under the lantern. The ink lines looked thin and tired. Osric could relate. The note also says, Alden began. Ida cut in gently. If the note says we should walk farther into the tide, I will refuse. Alden gave her a look of mild irritation. It says the monks at Farne kept a small chart of shifting sandbars and winter currents. It says they updated it after each hard season. Osric nodded slowly. That would be useful. Alden hesitated. It also says the monks were reluctant to share it, because sailors treated it like a promise. And when the sea broke the promise, sailors blamed the monks. Ida shrugged. That seems fair. Everyone needs someone to blame. It saves time. Osric looked out toward Farne. We should go. Alden blinked. Now. Osric nodded. The letters came for Farne, and Herrick saw low moving fires north. If someone is arranging trouble, the Priory may already know more. We go while the tide is steady and the wind is not yet angry. Ida tightened her cloak. You are assuming the wind will respect your plan. Osric gave a faint smile. I am not assuming. I am asking politely. They returned to Greyhaven before the sand had fully decided to swallow their footprints. The harbour was dim with lamps and the occasional flare of torchlight. Men moved with quick purpose. Bryn Hale stood near the dock hall, speaking with a scribe. He looked up when he saw them. You are walking on beaches at night, Bryn said. That is an interesting choice. Ida replied, I have many interesting choices. This is one of the safer ones. Osric spoke. We hung the Saltwick lantern. We will test the line at dawn from the outer water, and we are going to Farne. Bryn's face tightened. Farne is not part of my paperwork. Alden lifted the letter bundle slightly. It is part of these. Bryn sighed the sigh of a man losing an argument to religion. Fine. Take a boat. Do not take my best boat. Osric nodded. We will take the second best boat. Greyhaven will survive. They set out at first light in a small open craft with a stout sail and oars. Osric took the steering oar. Ida handled the sail lines with a sailor's confidence that she pretended came from network. Alden sat near the bow with the letters wrapped tight under oilcloth, as if words could drown. The sea between Greyhaven and Farne was cold and blunt. It did not play at being beautiful. It was grey water under grey sky, with a wind that pressed and pressed until you stopped noticing. The oars creaked, the hull slapped, the smell of salt filled every breath. Osric kept the boat on a steady line, using stormwood behind them until it faded into haze. He listened for Raven Reef surf and kept well south. Then he looked for Candle Rock, a low stone stack that rose from the water like a clenched fist. Past it, Saltwick's lantern should have been visible, a small dot on the shore. If their new marker worked, it would anchor the harbour in a way fog could not easily twist. Ida squinted. I see it. Osric felt a small easing, a faint glow, low and steady, hanging by the fisher hut. It looked humble. It looked like someone's quiet attempt at doing the right thing. Alden leaned forward. Good. That means it is lit. The first step is that the thing you planned actually exists. You would be amazed how often plans skip that part. They continued onward to Farne Isle. The island rose slowly, a dark shape with steep rock on one side and a small cove on the other. The Priory sat above the cove, low stone buildings huddled together like they were keeping secrets warm. As they approached, a bell rang once, not dramatic, just practical. A monk stood near the shore, cloaked in rough wool, watching with an expression that suggested he had seen too many visitors arrive with problems. Osric guided the boat into the cove. The water was calmer here, but the rocks close by were jagged and eager. Ida stepped out first and held the boat steady while Alden climbed out with the letters. The monk spoke in a quiet voice. You are from Greyhaven? Alden nodded. Brother Merrick. The monk's eyes narrowed slightly with recognition. Father Alden. They exchanged the kind of greeting that had the warmth of two stones acknowledging they were both stones. Merrick looked at Osric and Ida. Travellers, Ida replied, only on days ending in winter. Merrick did not smile, but his eyes softened a fraction. Come. The tide will change soon. It always does. They climbed the stone steps to the Priory. Inside, the air smelled of damp stone, smoke, and something herbal. A small fire burned in a hearth. The warmth felt cautious, as if it feared be asked to do too much. Alder wood crackled. A second monk brought cups of hot broth, and Osric decided that monks were sometimes the best sailors because they understood quiet endurance. Alden handed over the letters. Merrick opened them with careful hands. His face changed as he read, not wildly, but in small tightening lines around the eyes. Someone inland is asking about our beacon, Merrick said at last. Osric nodded. The letters say men watch roads and ask questions. Merrick folded the paper. They also asked here. They asked if we keep charts. They asked if we signal ships. They asked if we have seen northern crews. They ask too many questions for men who claim to hate smuggling. Ida sipped broth. Men who hate smuggling usually hate it because they are not paid for it. Merrick gave a small nod. That seems accurate. Alden leaned forward. We need the winter chart. The note says you keep Pug. Merrick's eyes narrowed. The note should not have left this island. Alden replied, It left a long time ago. It drifted into my records. Records have legs. Merrick looked at Osric. The winter chart is not a promise. It is an opinion made of ink and regret. Osric answered calmly, That is all I want, an opinion that is better than guessing. Merrick studied him a moment, then stood. Come. They followed Merrick into a small side room lined with shelves. On one shelf lay a board with markings burned into it, a rough map of the coast and islands. Small pegs could be moved to show sandbar shifts. The board was dark with age and use. Merrick touched it gently. Each winter we adjust this. When a ship scrapes a sandbar, we learn. When a harbour wall changes the current, we learn. When the sea decides to rewrite the coast, we learn again. Alden breathed out, impressed. This is better than my notes. Merrick looked at him. Your notes are the reason I have fewer hours of sleep. Ida leaned in, eyes sharp. Where is the danger line north of Raven Reef? Merrick moved a peg. Here, it has shifted south this season. The current pulls stronger after dusk when the wind comes north. Osric memorized it. And false fires. Merrick paused. 2 nights ago we saw a low flame on a boat near the reef line. It moved, then vanished. The next morning, driftwood washed up with cloth scraps and broken rope. Alden's mouth tightened. No bodies. Merrick shook his head. Only signs. The sea does not always return what it takes. Osric kept his voice calm. We are setting a second harbour marker at Saltwick. Candle Rock and a lantern. Merrick nodded slowly. Good. Keep it quiet. Ida tilted her head. Quiet is difficult in Greyhaven. Merrick gave a faint look that might have been humour. Then you will need to practice. Alden asked, Can we copy the chart? Merrick frowned. Copying is easy. Understanding is harder, but yes. I will allow a copy, on one condition. Osric waited. Merrick looked at Ida. You will tell your Doc Reeve that if his inland friends come asking again, he should send them here. I would like to speak with them, kindly, with questions. Ida smiled faintly. That sounds like a threat made of politeness. Merrick did not deny it. I am a monk. I have little else. They spent the next hour making a careful copy on parchment, marking pegs and lines with ink that Alden handled like treasured. Osric watched the coast shape, and felt the comfort of knowing the sea had patterns, even if it enjoyed breaking them. When the tide began to turn, they left. Merrick walked them to the shore. Be careful, he said. Osric nodded. Always. Merrick added, If you see a low fire that moves against the wind, do not chase it into fog. That is how men become stories. Ida replied, We prefer to become old. They sailed back toward Greyhaven with the chart copy wrapped tight and the letters delivered. The sky darkened early, wind rose in cold gusts. Far off, Stormwood's beacon was a dim glow on the cliff. As they approached, Osric looked for Saltwick's lantern. It was there, a small steady dot low on the shore. He felt a quiet satisfaction. The marker existed, the plan was real. That was enough joy for a winter day. Then, to the north, near the line Merrick had warned about, Osric saw a brief flicker, low, moving, unsteady. Edda saw it too. She did not speak, she only tightened her grip on the sail line. Osric kept his voice calm. We go home, we do not chase. Alden swallowed. That was not a beacon. Osric answered no, that was a question. They sailed into Greyhaven with the new chart and the old warning ringing in their minds. On the cliff, Stormwood burned. On the sand, the Saltwick lantern held steady. And beyond Raven Reef, someone was practicing lies with fire. Chapter 6. Ice on the Gunwale. By the next week, the cold stopped pretending to be temporary. It settled in like an unwanted guest who had brought luggage and opinions. Greyhaven's harbour wall wore a skin of frost each morning. Ropes stiffened. Nets grew heavy with ice crystals that glittered beautifully, while making work harder, which was the sea's favourite kind of beauty. Osric Pike woke before dawn and went straight to the piers because winter did not respect sleep. He found Ida already there, fingers red, working a knot loose from a frozen net. "You were early," Osric said. Ida replied, "I am late for yesterday." He accepted that. Across the harbour, Wulf Rowan stood on the cliff path, looking down as if he was checking whether the world still needed his fire. Wulf carried a bundle of dry kindling like a child carrying a pet. Bryn Hale met Osric near the dock hall with a parchment in hand. "The Priory chart copy," Alden said. Osric nodded. "Alden did good work." Bryn frowned. "I do not like the idea of monks keeping better harbour record than I do." Ida walked up and took the parchment without asking. She scanned it quickly. "This is not better, it is just honest." Bryn sighed. "That is what I mean." They spread the chart on a barrel top and weighted the corners with stones. The lines showed the channel shift, the danger pull north of Raven Reef, and the safe approach line using Candle Rock and Saltwick's lantern. Osric traced it with a finger, matching it to the feel of the water in his memory. Herrick Stone arrived quietly with two of his crew. They moved like men used to cold, shoulders loose, eyes sharp. Herrick nodded at the chart. "Priory work." Osric nodded. "Yes." Herrick looked toward the open water beyond the wall. "The low-moving fires are closer. We saw one last night. It drifted near the reef line, then vanished." Bryn's face tightened. "Vanished how?" Herrick answered, "Like a lamp being covered, or like a boat turning away." Ida said, "Or like someone practicing?" Wulf Rowan appeared, as if summoned by the mention of practice. He looked offended by the entire concept. "My beacon is steady. If ships follow false fires, that is not my problem." Osric kept his voice calm. "It becomes your problem when they blame Stormwood. It becomes our problem when ships break on rocks outside our wall. And it becomes everyone's problem when inland men arrive to fix things by making them worse." Wulf muttered, "Inland men are always damp inside." Bryn ignored him, which was the kindest response. "We will use the Saltwick lantern line for incoming ships whenever fog rises. Osric will train 2 more pilots to recognize it." A fisherman named Hob Crane groaned. "Training means work." Ida looked at him. "You can also choose the alternative. You can explain winter currents to a sinking boat while you are swimming." Hob closed his mouth. The day went on with the slow grind of harbour labour. A merchant vessel approached at midday, heavy with wool and grain. The wind was sharper now, and ice formed along the gunwales where spray froze. The ship hesitated offshore, uncertain. Its captain likely saw Stormwood's beacon and also the grey smear of fog beginning to form north. Osric took the pilot boat out with 2 rowers. Herrick watched from the pier, arms folded as if judging Osric's oar angles. Wulf watched from the cliff, as if judging everyone's life choices. At the harbour mouth, Osric heard Raven Reef. The surf had a rougher edge today. He kept south, looking for Candle Rock. It stood like a low dark tooth in the swell. Beyond it, Saltwick's lantern glowed faintly even in daylight, a small steady point under cloud. Osric raised his lantern and signalled the merchant ship to follow. The captain shouted something about the beacon line. Osric called back, calm and firm. "Follow the low light south, not the high glow. The fog lies." The ship edged south, slow. Osric sounded with the lead line. Depth held, then lessened. He adjusted. The ship followed. A gust shoved the hull. Ice on the gunwale made the ship heavier and slower to answer. The bow drifted north. Osric felt the wrong pull in his bones. He shouted to his rowers, "Pull harder, keep us ahead." They dug in. The pilot boat surged. Osric waved his lantern in a tight clear motion and called to the helmsman. "South, now, slow turn." The merchant captain, to his credit, listened. The ship responded, bow easing back into safe water. Osric sounded again. Depth increased. The channel held. They entered the harbour without drama, which in winter counted as success. On the pier, Bryn exhaled as if he had been holding his breath since last spring. Ida met Osric as he stepped out. That worked. Osric nodded. It worked today. Ida smirked faintly. Today is generous. By late afternoon the cold deepened. The harbour lamp seemed warmer by comparison, small circles of yellow against grey. Inside the net shed, Ida mended with the steady rhythm that made time slow. Osric sat nearby, warming his hands, listening to the quiets. Alden sat at the table with parchment, copying the priory chart into his own careful notes and muttering about ink that froze. The letter travellers, Ellen Harrow and the two men, had stayed in Greyhaven a few days, then left by road with an escort of fishermen who pretended they were going that way anyway. Ellen had thanked Ida with a nod and thanked Osric with a look that said she would remember his face if trouble returned. Osric did not enjoy being memorable. Outside, a bell rang on the pier. A watch call. Harrick appeared at the shed door, face calm but eyes intent. "Low fire," he said. Osric stood. "Where?" Harrick pointed northward, past the harbour wall, near the reef line, moving slow. Ida set her needle down. Finally. "The sea is offering us a choice." Alden looked up from his parchment. "We should inform Bryn." Osric nodded. "We will, and we will be careful." They moved to the pier head where Bryn and Wulf already stood, because in Greyhaven information travelled quickly when it smelled like danger. Bryn held a lantern and stared into the dim. Wulf's jaw was tight, as if he was personally offended by the horizon. Osric scanned the water. At first he saw only darkness and swell. Then he saw it. A small flicker, low on the water north of Candle Rock, closer to Raven Reef than any sensible boat should be. It moved against the wind, slow and stubborn. "That is not driftwood," Osric said. Bryn's voice was tight. "Do we row out?" Wulf snapped. "We should light the beacon higher, burn it bright enough to shame that false flame." Ida replied, "The sea does not feel shame, it feels currents." Harrick spoke quiet. "If that light is a trap, they want someone to chase it. They want a pilot boat in fog." Osric nodded. "Yes. We do not chase into fog, Merrick warned us." Bryn frowned. "Then what do we do? Let them sit there." Osric watched the flicker. It moved slightly south, then back north, as if testing the line of sound from Raven Reef, as if checking whether a ship might follow. Osric said, "We answer without leaving the wall." Wulf glared. "Answer how?" Osric pointed towards Saltwick Sands. "We use the low lantern line and we make it brighter. We show any ship offshore that the safe line is south. We do not make a show with Stormwood. We make a quiet truth that only helps the right people." Bryn blinked. "You want to light Saltwick stronger." Ida nodded. "I can add 2 more lanterns along the sand hut line, not close enough to be mistaken for a lure, just enough to draw a safe path." Wulf scoffed. "And if the false fire moves south," Osric replied, "then we keep our line steady and watch. If they come close, we will see their boat. If they stay out, they will waste their night playing with a flame." Bryn hesitated, then nodded. "Do it." Ida moved fast, because she always did when a plan became real. She grabbed 2 spare lanterns from the shed, each with a glass guard and a hook. Harrick offered 2 crewmen to go with her. They did not speak much, but they carried lanterns like men who understood practical work. Osric went too, because pilots did not order others into cold sand while staying warm by principle. Alden stayed with Bryn to keep watch, and to keep Bryn from inventing unnecessary rules. They crossed the beach path to Saltwick, under a sky that looked bruised. Wind cut along the dunes. Their boots sank. The lantern flames wavered but held. At the fisher hut the original lantern still hung, steady. Ida hooked 1 new lantern to a beam farther south, and another a short distance inland on a pole driven into firmer ground. 3 low lights now marked the safe line, a gentle curve away from Raven Reef and toward Greyhaven's mouth. Osric stepped back and looked from the sea angle. From offshore the 3 lights would form a clear guide that fog could blur but not easily twist. A false fire might still tempt, but it would have to compete with a line of calm, steady truth. Ida watched the northern water. The false flicker was still there, faint in the distance, as if irritated that Greyhaven had not taken the bait. Harrick's crewman spoke quietly in his own tongue, then in rough English. "They wait for panic." Osric nodded. "Then we do not give it." They returned to the harbour wall and climbed the pier head again. Bryn stood there, shoulders stiff, eyes fixed on the sea. Wulf stood beside him, arms crossed, looking like he wanted to argue with the horizon until it apologised. Osric followed Bryn's gaze. The false fire had shifted slightly, then dimmed. It flickered once more, then vanished, as if someone had covered it with a cloak. Ida exhaled slowly. They did not like our answer. Bryn's voice was low. Or they learned we are watching. Wulf muttered, "Good. Let them watch my fire. Let it burn into their eyes." Ida glanced up at Stormwood. The beacon burned steady, not flaring, not showing off, just doing its works. Osric felt the quiet satisfaction of a small victory that would not be celebrated. The best kind. No one was unalived. No one was even dramatically wet beyond the usual. A trap had been met with patience instead of pride. They went back to the net shed as night settled fully. The lamp inside threw warm light across mended rope and folded cloth. Alden resumed his careful copying. Ida resumed her stitching. Osric sat and listened to the harbour sounds, the steady creak of pilings, the occasional shout, the wind's endless commentary. Harrick stood in the doorway a moment, looking at the lamplight, then at the dark beyond. "Greyhaven is stubborn," he said. Ida replied, "We try." Osric added, "The sea is more stubborn." Harrick nodded once as if approving that someone here understood the real opponent. Then he left to return to his watch. Osric watched the lamp flame and let his breathing slow. Winter would continue. Inland men would still ask question. False fires might return. But Greyhaven had added a quieter line of guidance, and it was already making a difference. Outside, the North Sea moved in the dark, disappointed for now, but never bored. Chapter 7. The Harbour Court of Complaints. Greyhaven had two kinds of storms. One came from the sea and arrived with honest force. The other came from people and arrived with confident speeches. Bryn Hale preferred the second kind, because it could be seated on benches and asked to wait its turn. The sea had never once waited its turn. The dock hall filled before midday. Wet cloaks dripped onto the floor. Boots thumped. Voices rose and fell as if volume could improve accuracy. The hearth fire burned low, doing its best, which was the only kind of best available in winter. Bryn stood at the front with a slate board and a piece of chalk. He looked like a man who had been promoted against his will into the position of adult in the room. Two scribes sat at a table, eyes down, ready to write the kind of notes that would later be used as proof that no one had agreed to anything. Osric took his usual place by the wall. Ida sat near the side, needle and cord in hand, mending a net while listening as if she were not listening. Wulf Rowan sat near the hearth, arms crossed, face set in a permanent expression of personal offence. Harrick Stone and one of his crew stood quietly near the door, watching with the calm of men who had survived worse arguments. Bryn cleared his throat. "We will address the matter of signals, pilots, and the recent appearance of low-moving fires." A fisherman named Hob Crane spoke first, as if the hall had been built specifically for his complaints. "The new southern lantern line is confusing." Ida did not look up. "It is only confusing if you refuse to learn." Hob ignored her. "We have had one beacon since my father was loud. Now we have 3 little lights on the sand, and Stormwood, and Wulf making faces. A man cannot tell which way is safe." Osric spoke calmly. "If a man cannot tell which way is safe, he should not take his boat out in winter." That drew a few chuckles. Hob did not chuck-cuck. He pointed at Osric. "We should not need to learn new tricks. The sea should learn to behave." Wulf snorted. "Yes. Someone should write the sea a rule." Bryn raised a hand. "The southern lantern line is for fog and false fires. It is a quiet guide. It does not replace Stormwood, it supports it." A merchant named Rolf Grey stepped forward, cloak fine enough to look offended by the air. "What supports the merchant is predictability. If your signals change, ships will avoid Greyhaven. Then you will have no trade to argue over." Ida finally looked up. "We will still have fish. Fish do not care about your predictability." Rolf pressed on, voice smooth. "The point is trust. If a ship sees a fire on the coast, how does it know it is yours and not a trap?" Osric answered, "It knows by pattern and place. Stormwood is high and steady. Saltwick lanterns are low and in a line. A single low wandering light is not ours." Hobcrane muttered, "Unless Wulf walks around with his fire." Wulf leaned forward, eyes sharp. "I do not walk around with my fire." Ida said softly, "That is true, the fire would refuse." A few fishermen laughed. Wulf did not. He stared at Ida as if he was trying to decide whether sarcasm was a crime. Bryn tapped the chalk on the slate. "Enough. Here are the new agreed signals. 1 steady beacon means harbour open. 2 short lifts of the fire means danger north. 3 short lifts means danger south. If fog thickens, Saltwick Lantern Line becomes the primary approach guide. Osric will teach every working captain the line before the next full tide cycle." Hobcrane groaned. "Teaching means time." Ida returned to her net. "So does rowing into rocks." A younger fisherman spoke up, one Osric recognized as Tam Lorne. "What about the false fire? If we see it again, do we row out?" Bryn hesitated. His instincts wanted to write a rule for it. Rules were a comfort, but the Cian people were both too creative for fixed rules. Osric answered, "We watch first. We do not chase into fog. If the light comes close enough for us to see the boat, then we act. Until then, we hold our line and keep ships on the safe path." Rolf Grey frowned. "That sounds like letting thieves do as they please." Osric looked at him. "It sounds like not dying to prove a point." Harrick Stone spoke quietly from the door. "In my coast we say a man who charges every shadow will be tired when the real trouble arrives." The hall shifted. Some men looked annoyed that an outsider spoke. Some looked relieved that someone said something sensible. Bryn nodded slowly. "Then we do not charge shadows, we prepare." Wulf's voice cut in, sharp. "I will not dim my beacon because someone else plays tricks." Osric met his gaze. "No one asked you to dim it. We asked you to use patterns so fog does not turn your pride into a lie." Wulf's jaw tightened. "My fire is not pride." Ida murmured, "It is, but it is also useful, so we forgive it." Bryn took a slow breath and forced the hall back to order. Next matter, the inland men. A murmur ran through the room. That topic felt less like weather and more like trouble with boots. Alden entered then, late, carrying a small stack of parchment. He looked calm in the way monks looked calm when they were carrying news they disliked. He set the papers on Bryn's table. "I have a summary from Farne," Alden said. "Brother Merrick confirms questions from inland men. They ask about beacons and pilots. They claim authority. They did not provide proof of authority." Bryn's face hardened. "Then they have no authority here." Alden nodded. "Merrick suggests we tell them to speak with the Priory if they return. He says he will be kind." Ida raised an eyebrow. Kind is what a monk calls it when he plans to be relentless. Alden did not deny it. He added one more thing. "The Priory chart shows Raven Reef Pull has shifted farther south. The water is less forgiving this season." That quieted the hall more than any speech. Men did not fear paperwork. They feared rocks. Bryn nodded sharply. "Then we will treat the northern line as closed during dusk and night tides until further notice. Any ship entering after dusk uses Saltwick line only." Rolf Grey started to protest, then stopped, doing quick coin calculations in his head and deciding living merchants earned more coin than drowned merchants. Hobcrane muttered, "This is becoming a lot of rules." Bryn looked at him. "Winter is a lot of rules. The sea enforces them. I am simply writing them down before it does." For a moment it was almost peaceful. Then a runner burst into the hall, breathless, cloak half on. He pointed toward the harbour mouth. "A light!" he shouted. "Low! North!" The room moved as one. Benches scraped, boots pounded, arguments paused, not solved but delayed. Everyone streamed out to the pier head, faces turned toward the open water. Fog was forming again, thin at first, then thicker in patches. Stormwood's beacon burned high, steady. Below it, the Saltwick lantern line was visible as faint low points on the sand, 3 small steady glows. Farther out, near the northern line, a single low flicker moved. It was closer than before. It hovered near the edge of hearing where Raven Reef's surf sounded rougher. Osric felt the familiar weight settle in his chest. Not panic, not excitement. Responsibility, heavy and boring. Bryn spoke tightly. That is close. Wulf's voice was sharp. It is an insult. Ida said quietly, It is bait. Harrick watched the flicker with narrowed eyes. It moves against wind again. Osric nodded. Then it is controlled. Bryn looked at Osric. Do we row? Osric studied the water. The flicker was north of Candle Rock. It was not drifting. It was testing. Moving a little, stopping, moving again. It wanted attention. It wanted someone to chase. Osric answered calmly, Not yet. We light the southern line brighter. We keep stormward steady. We send no boat beyond the wall. Wulf bristled. We should go and chase them away. Ida glanced at him. With what? A stern look. Wulf glared. With a boat. Osric kept his tone gentle. If we row out into fog, they win. If we hold steady and guide ships safely, they gain nothing. They will either leave or come close enough to be seen. Bryn nodded slowly. Do it. Edda moved first, as always. She disappeared toward the net shed to gather spare lantern oil and wicks. Herrick's crew joined her without being asked. Osric remained at the pierhead, eyes on the moving flicker, measuring distance and sound. The surf on Raven Reef rose and fell with the swell. The false light moved again, then paused. It felt like someone staring back. When Ida returned, she had a lantern in each hand and a calm expression that suggested she had already argued with worse things than this. She handed one to a fisherman and nodded toward Saltwick. Light the fourth marker farther south, not in a straight line, but enough to show a curve. The fisherman hesitated. Bryn opened his mouth. Osric spoke first. Do it, now! The man ran. Bryn turned to Alden. Can you see if any ship is offshore? Alden squinted into the fog. Nothing clear. Harrick spoke quietly. That is also the point. They want to keep the sea empty so only their fire speaks. Osric nodded. Then we speak louder with calm. The Saltwick lantern line brightened. A fourth low glow appeared farther south. The safe curve became clearer. Stormwood remained steady, not flaring, not lifting. Wulf stood rigid, forced to endure the cruel reality of cooperating. The false flicker wavered. It moved a short distance south, as if testing whether it could compete with the new line. Then it paused. Osric watched. In the dim, he could almost imagine a small boat with a hooded lamp, someone holding a cloak to cover and reveal the flame, someone waiting for a chase. The flicker dimmed, then brightened once, then vanished. Not fading like driftwood, vanishing like a hand closing. Ida exhaled. They are learning we do not play. Bryn's voice was low, or they are planning a different game. Osric did not answer. He kept looking at the spot where the light had been. The sea rolled as if nothing had happened. That was how it always worked. It did not announce danger. It simply waited. Behind them, the dock hall stood open. Arguments paused inside like half-written sentences. Bryn finally spoke. Back inside, we finish the meeting. We do not let a flicker control our day. Wulf muttered, My fire controls the day. Ida replied softly, Your fire controls your mood. The tide controls the day. They returned to the hall and completed the rest of the complaints with a new seriousness. Decisions were written, duties assigned, watch schedules set. No one smiled much, but no one panicked either. When it was over, Osric walked back to the net shed. Ida followed, carrying her needle like a small weapon of order. Alden came too, parchments under his arm. They sat in lamplight while wind rattled the door. Alden spoke quietly. We did well. Ida replied, We did not do foolish. That is different. Osric warmed his hands near the lamp and listened to the harbour settle. Outside, stormwood burned. On the sands, the lantern line held steady. Beyond the wall, the sea moved in darkness, and someone who enjoyed tricks had been denied their reward, for now. Chapter 8. The False Fire on Raven Cliff. The next night the sea changed its tone. It was not louder, not wilder. It was quieter in a way that felt deliberate, as if it wanted the harbour to lean closer so it could whisper something unpleasant. Fog arrived before dusk, sliding in low and smooth. Stormwood's beacon became a glowing blur above the cliff. Its edges softened until it looked like a suggestion. The Saltwick lantern line, low and steady, became more important by the minute. Osric Pike did not like fog. No pilot liked fog. Fog was not an enemy you could fight. It was an absence that made every decision heavier. He stood at the pier head with Ida and Bryn. Wulf Rowan was on the cliff, visible as a dark shape near the fire basket. Harrick Stone stood near the outer pier with two of his crew, eyes on the open water. No ships were scheduled to arrive. That meant someone would arrive. Winter did not respect schedules. Ida spoke softly. Listen. Osric listened. Raven Reef's surf was louder than it should have been for this swell that matched the Priory chart. The pull had shifted. The reef was hungrier. Then, like a cruel reply to his thoughts, a light appeared north of the channel. Low, small, flickering with intention. Bryn's shoulders tightened. Again. Osric nodded. Again. But this time it was not offshore. This time it was closer to the coast itself, near the rocky rise called Raven Cliff, a lower outcrop north of Beacon Cliff. It was not the high beacon. It was a second fire, on land, placed where a sailor might mistake it for a harbour marker in fog. Ida's voice was flat. Someone walked onto Raven Cliff and lit that. Alden arrived at the pier head, breath visible, eyes narrowed. That is too close. Osric watched the false fire. It flared once, then steadied. It was smaller than Stormwood, but fog made size meaningless. It was in the wrong place, and wrong places were the worst kind of convincing. Harrick's voice carried from the outer pier. That is not driftwood. That is a trap. Wulf's shout came faintly from above. Who dares light a fire on my coast? Ida murmured, someone who has not met you properly. Bryn looked at Osric. If that fire stays, any ship offshore could follow it into Raven Reef. Osric nodded. Then we remove it. Carefully. Alden's eyes widened. You said we do not chase. Osric answered, we do not chase into fog on open water. This is on land. Land is at least honest about where it is, mostly. Ida stepped forward. I will go. Osric looked at her. No. Ida did not flinch. Yes. Osric kept his voice calm, but firm. If someone set that fire, they may be watching it. They may want to lure a harbour crew into the dark. This is not network. This is people work. Ida replied, I am excellent at people work. I simply do not enjoy it. Bryn raised a hand. Both of you. We go as a group, not alone. 2 from the harbour, 2 from the Longship, and Alden stays here with me to watch the water. Wulf will remain on the cliff so he does not set himself on fire with rage. Alden looked relieved to be assigned a job that involved standing still. Bryn turned to Harrick. Will you send men? Harrick nodded once and gestured. 2 crewmen stepped forward, quiet and ready, carrying short clubs and a lanting. They did not look eager. They looked prepared. That was better. Osric took a hooded lantern and a coil of rope. Ida took another lantern and, without comment, a long pole used for pushing boats off pilings. It was not a weapon. It was a tool. Tools were less alarming and often more effective. They moved along the shore path toward Raven Cliff. Fog thickened as they went, swallowing the pier lights behind them. The world narrowed to lantern glow, wet ground, and the sound of surf. Osric walked first, listening. The false fire on Raven Cliff flickered through fog ahead, an orange smear on rock. It was placed high enough to be seen from sea, low enough to be mistaken for a marker, and close enough to the reef line to cause harm quickly. Ida spoke softly. Whoever did this knows the coast. Osric nodded. Or they asked someone who knows. One of Harrick's crewmen, a broad man named Skell, muttered in rough English. Coastal thieves. They love fog. Fog hides their shame. Ida murmured, fog also hides their faces, which is more useful. They approached the base of Raven Cliff. The slope was slick with wet grass and loose stone. Osric tested footing before each step. The surf noise grew louder, rougher. Raven Reef was near. The air smelled of salt and cold smoke. Halfway up the slope, Osric stopped and held up a hand. He listened. For a moment there was only wind and surf. Then he heard it. A soft scuff on stone, not part of the sea. Someone was near the fire. He lowered his voice. Lanterns down, move slow. They hooded their lanterns to dim the light and climbed with care. The false fire was only a few strides away now, burning in a small basket of brush and pitch set into a shallow hollow between stones. Whoever built it knew how to make it hold in wind. Osric saw a shape crouched near it, adjusting something, perhaps adding fuel, perhaps shaping the flame to be seen from sea. Ida tightened her grip on the pole. Osric stepped forward quietly and spoke in a calm voice meant to carry without startling. "That is not your fire." The crouched figure froze. Slowly it rose. A man, cloaked, hood up, face half hidden. He did not speak. He shifted his weight as if deciding whether to run or fight. Skell and the other crewmen stepped to either side, blocking retreat. They moved like men who had practiced blocking. Osric kept his voice steady. "Put out the fire and walk back with us. You will have a warmer night that way." The man gave a short laugh, harsh, warmer. In Greyhaven, Ida spoke calm and dry. Warmer than the sea. The man glanced toward the slope, calculating. Then he threw something into the fire. The flame flared suddenly, brighter, throwing sparks. Osric reacted instantly. He dropped low and yanked the rope, pulling a damp sailcloth bundle forward. He had brought it for this. He threw it over the fire basket, smothering the flame. Smoke hissed. Sparks died. Ida lunged with the pole, not striking hard, but pinning the man's cloak to the rock as he tried to bolt. The man snarled and twisted, but Skell grabbed him and hauled him back. The man fought, kicking and cursing. The other crewman held his arms. Osric kept his voice calm, because calm made fights smaller. "Enough. You are cold. You are tired. You are not winning." The man spat into the dirt. "You think you are heroes." Ida replied, "No, we think you are annoying." Osric crouched near the smothered fire and checked. The flame was gone, only a dull glow under cloth. He packed wet sand around it, then pressed the cloth tighter until the glow died completely. He stood and faced the man. "Why?" The man's eyes flashed under the hood. "Coin, goods, you know, winter work." Osric nodded slowly. "Who told you Ravencliff was the place?" The man hesitated. Ida leaned in slightly, voice soft and sharp. "If you lie, I will drag you back to Brynhale and let him explain paperwork to you until spring." The man shuddered, as if that threat had weight. He finally spoke. "A man inland. He came to the coast. He asked about beacons. He paid for answer. He said he would protect us if we helped." Osric felt the cold settle deeper. Protect. That word was used by men who wanted control. Skell tightened his grip. Inland men again. Osric asked, "Name?" The man hesitated again. Then he said, "Garvin Holt." He wore a badge. He said he served a lord. Alden had warned about men claiming authority. This was one of them, or one of their hands. Osric looked down the slope toward the harbour, where fog hid everything but faint glows. Any ship offshore could have seen that false fire and turned north. They had stopped it in time, but only Dees. Ida spoke quietly, almost to herself. "So the boots are real." Osric nodded. "Yes." They bound the man's hands with rope and started down the cliff path. Fog clung to them, damp and close. The surf noise followed like a reminder. Behind them, Ravencliff was dark again, honest and dangerous in its natural way, not made worse by human invention. When they reached the pier head, Bryn and Alden were waiting with lanterns. Wulf stood above on Beacon Cliff, a dark silhouette near the beacon. When he saw the bound man, he shouted down something that sounded like a curse and a prayer mixed together. Bryn's eyes narrowed. "Who is this?" Osric spoke clearly. "A man lighting a false fire on Ravencliff. He says he was paid by Garvin Holt, an inland man with a badge." Alden's face tightened. "That name is new." Bryn's mouth hardened. "He will sit in the dock storehouse until he remembers more names." The bound man spat again. "You cannot hold me." Ida looked at him. "We can. We have rope. You have a mouth. The rope will win." Bryn motioned to two fishermen. "Take him. Guard him. Do not let him talk to anyone except Alden and me." The fisherman dragged the man away, muttering about fools who played with fire near reefs. Osric turned back to the water. Fog still lay thick. The Saltwick lantern line glowed low and steady, guiding any cautious sailor south. Stormwood's beacon burned above, steady, using the agreed pattern, not flaring, not trying to outshine the night. Bryn spoke quietly. "This is no longer only sea trouble." Osric nodded. "No, this is people trouble." Alden added, "Which often becomes sea trouble when people insist on combining their worst habits." Ida looked out into the fog. "If Garvin Holt is paying men to light false fires, he will try again, or he will try something new." Harrick nodded from the outer pier. "He will learn Greyhaven is not easy bait." Wulf's voice came down from the cliff, harsh. "No one uses my coast. If this Holt comes, I will greet him with fire." Ida murmured, "Try not to greet him so hard that you burn your own beard. We need you annoyed, not crispy." For a moment, even in the cold, Osric felt the smallest lift of humour. It was not joy, it was the quiet relief of people holding together under pressure. He turned to Bryn. "We keep the lantern line bright. We keep watch. We do not let fear make our decisions, and we speak with the Priory again." Bryn nodded once, and we prepare for visitors. The harbour settled back into its night rhythm, but with sharper eyes. The false fire had been smothered. The man who lit it was bound. The name Garvin Holt hung in the air like smoke. Out beyond the wall, the North Sea moved in fog. Still restless, still cold, but denied one more chance to turn a human trick into a wreck. Chapter 9. The Sounding Line and the Secret Channel. The morning after the false fire on Raven Cliff, Greyhaven woke up as if nothing unusual had happened, which was the harbour way of admitting it had happened. Nets still needed mending, boats still needed scraping, people still needed pretending. Winter did not pause for anyone to process their feelings, and in Greyhaven nobody was inclined to process them anyway. Osric Pike stood at the pier head before dawn, listening to the sea like it might confess. Fog had thinned overnight, leaving the water dark and flat, too calm for comfort. Calm seas in winter were rarely a gift. They were usually a trick. They made men bold. They made them forget that the sea could change its mind quickly. Ida Thorne arrived with a lantern and a bundle of dried fish wrapped in cloth, because she believed in preparation and did not trust anyone else to remember food. She handed Osric the cloth without a word. He accepted it without comment. This was how Greyhaven expressed friendship. It was not emotional, it was practical. Bryn Hale came next, cloak tight, face tight, hands behind his back as if he was holding his temper in place. Alden followed him, looking weary but focused. Wulf Rowan was already up on Beacon Cliff with Stormwood burning low and steady, because Wulf believed sleep was a rumour. Harrick Stone stood near his longship with two of his crew, watching the harbour with the calm of people who did not belong to it, and therefore did not have to pretend it was normal. The bound man from Raven Cliff had been taken to the storehouse. Bryn had placed guards at the door and had instructed them to be polite but unhelpful, which was Bryn's favourite style. Osric spoke quietly to Bryn. "Any more names?" Bryn shook his head. "He says Garvin Holt. He says he does not know more. He says he was promised protection and coin." Ida murmured, "Promised protection by a man who sends others into cold cliffs. That sounds generous." Alden looked out toward the open water. "Merrick warned us about becoming stories. We did not become stories last night. That is good." Osric nodded. "It is good, but it means they will adjust." Bryn's jaw tightened. "Let them adjust. They can adjust somewhere else." Osric turned his gaze south toward Saltwick Sands. The lantern line still glowed faintly in the dim, 4 small low points. It looked simple. It looked stubborn. It looked like a quiet refusal to panic. He said, "Today we measure the old channel." Bryn frowned. "Today." Osric nodded. "The Priory chart shows Raven Reef pull is stronger. We need options. If someone tries to control our signals, we need a path that does not rely on someone else's light." Wulf's voice carried faintly down from the cliff. "My light is my light." Ida called up without raising her voice much. "Yes. That is why we need a second plan." Wulf grunted something that might have been agreement if you were generous. Osric motioned toward the pilot boat. We go out on the calm water while it stays calm. We sound the old line with lead. We mark it by memory, by bearing, and by feel. We do it now, not when storm is shouting. Harry stepped closer. A secret channel. Osric nodded. Not secret to the sea, only to men with badges and question. Harry's mouth twitched. I like it. Bryn looked at Harry. You will not share it. Harry replied evenly. If I wanted to share your harbour, I would have done it with oars and noise. I am here for shelter, not ownership. Ida murmured. That was almost polite. Greyhaven might ruin you. Harrick accepted that without offence. Osric took the pilot boat out with 2 rowers and Ida beside him. Alden came too, because he insisted on being helpful, and because the Priory chart copy in his head was more useful than his knees were fragile. Bryn stayed in the harbour with a watch crew. Wulf stayed on the cliff, guarding his fire like a jealous saint. The sea beyond the wall was calmer than it had been in days. The swell rolled low and slow. The sky was grey and heavy, but not yet angry. Osric did not trust it, but he appreciated the chance to work without being slapped. He set the course south of Candle Rock, and then slightly farther out than most ships dared. The old note from Farne suggested an approach that skirted the worst pull from Raven Reef by using deeper water, then cutting in only when the bottom and sound changed in a specific way. Osric lowered the lead line and let the weight fall. It hit bottom with a small dull tap that travelled up the rope and into his hands. He hauled it up, fingers reading the wet marks and the feel of what clung to the lead. Sand, then a hint of shell, then sand again. He repeated it, slow and steady, like prayer. Alden watched with interest. You read that line like a monk reads a book, Osric replied. This book bites. Ida leaned forward, eyes on the water. We should mark the points. Osric nodded. We will. In our heads first. Then with small signs that looked like nothing to anyone else. He took out a short length of cord and tied a knot around a peg fixed near the bow. Not a marker for the sea, but a reminder for him. 1 knot meant this depth and bottom feel. 2 knots would mean the next shift. It was not fancy, it was reliable. Reliable was rare. They worked for hours, moving in a slow pattern. Sound, read, adjust, sound again. Osric watched for the way the swell changed when it crossed subtle underwater shapes. Ida watched for surface clues, colour changes, foam patterns, anything the water revealed by accident. Alden muttered notes under his breath, then corrected himself, then muttered again, because Alden never stopped thinking once he started. At one point, Ida said, Calm seas really are suspicious. Osric nodded. They are waiting. Ida smiled faintly. Waiting for what? Osric answered, For someone to assume they are safe. They finished the sounding run and turned back toward Greyhaven. As they approached, the harbour looked small and solid, the wall dark against the sea. Stormward's beacon was visible again, steady and controlled. Saltwick lanterns glowed low. The combination felt like a conversation between high and low, loud and quiet, pride and practicality. As they entered the harbour, Bryn met them at the pier head with a man beside him who did not belong. The man wore a cloak too clean for Greyhaven and boots too polished for honest work. He stood with a straight back and a thin mouth. 2 companions stood a step behind him, hands near their belts as if belts contained authority. Bryn's face was calm in the way that meant his temper was sitting on a least. Osric stepped out of the pilot boat and studied the stranger. The stranger studied him back, eyes sharp, expression like a clerk considering a ledger. The man spoke. I am Garvin Holt. Ida exhaled softly through her nose. There he is. Holt continued. I represent Lord Sedgwick of the Inland Road. I have been sent to ensure coastal traffic is properly managed and that illegal trade is reduced. Bryn answered in an even voice. Greyhaven manages itself. Holt smiled without warmth. All places are managed by someone, the question is who. Osric kept his voice calm. What do you want? Holt's gaze shifted to Stormwood on the cliff. I want control of your beacon signals. I want a record of ships entering and leaving. I want pilot names. I want to know what alternative markers you have placed on the coast. Ida's eyes narrowed. You want everything. Holt nodded as if this were reasonable. I want order. Bryn's voice hardened. You have no authority here. Show proof. Holt produced a strip of parchment with a seal. He held it out like a prize. Bryn did not take it. Alden stepped forward instead, because Alden enjoyed seeing seals and also enjoyed finding them inadequate. Alden looked at the seal and the writing, then looked up. This says you are permitted to investigate smuggling on the inland roads and at the larger ports. It does not say you control beacons. It does not say you command pilots. Holt's smile tightened. It implies cooperation. Alden replied calmly. It implies you enjoy imagining extra lines. Harrick Stone stepped closer from the outer pier, drawn by the sound of tension. He stood a little behind Osric, present steady, not threatening, but noticeable. His crew watched quietly. Greyhaven's fishermen watched too, hands on ropes and nets and anything that could look like a tool. Holt noticed Harrick and frowned. "And who is this?" Osric answered, "A traveller who asked for shelter and gave watch in return. The kind of traveller you would call legal if he paid you, which he did not," Ida added. "And he did not light false fires on cliffs." Holt's eyes flicked to Ida. "What did you say?" Bryn spoke, a voice cold now. "We caught a man lighting a false fire on Raven Cliff. He said he was paid by you." Holt did not blink, but something tightened at the corner of his mouth. "That is a lie from a desperate man." Ida replied softly, "Desperate men lie, but they usually lie towards safety. Your name does not sound safe." Holt looked at Osric. "You are the pilot." Osric nodded. Holt stepped closer, just enough to make the moment heavy. "Your work is valuable. It should be regulated, properly, under lawful oversight. I can offer you protection and a stable fee." Osric kept his face calm. Protection from what? Holt's eyes held his. From accusations, from trouble, from the kind of unfortunate incidents that happen when a harbour resists lawful order. Alden spoke quietly, as if he were reading from scripture. "That sounds like a threat." Holt spread his hands. "It is a warning. Winter brings desperation. People do foolish things. Fires start in the wrong places." Wulf Rowan's voice boomed from the cliff path as he strode down, cloak flapping like it was angry too. "Fires start where I say they start." Holt looked up at Wulf, then back at Bryn. "The beacon keeper is undisciplined," Ida murmured. "That is his best feature." Wulf pointed a finger at Holt. "You are the man who pays for false fires." Holt's voice remained smooth. "I pay for information. If someone misused coin, that is not my doing." Bryn stepped forward, every inch the dock reeve now, not the tired man who liked rules. "Then we will send you to Farne. The priory keeps records. The monks will review your seal and your claims. You will speak with Brother Merrick." Holt frowned. "I do not answer to monks." Alden smiled faintly. "Many men have said that. It rarely helps them." Holt looked around at the gathered faces. Fishermen, merchants, the Longship crew, the pilot, the monk, the beacon keeper. Greyhaven was small, but it was cohesive in the way of places that had survived long winters together. He spoke carefully. "I will return with more authority." Bryn nodded. "You may return with whatever papers you like. You may not control our fire." Holt's eyes narrowed. "Your harbour will regret defiance." Ida replied, "Our harbour regrets most things. We do not take it personally." Holt turned and walked away, companions following. He did not hurry. He wanted his leaving to feel significant. Greyhaven watched him go with the calm of people who had seen storms and knew drama was cheap. When he was out of hearing, Osric released a slow breath. Alden spoke softly. "He will not stop." Osric nodded. "No, he will try different methods." Bryn looked up at Stormwood, then down at Saltwick's low lights. "Then we will keep doing what we are doing. We will guide ships safely. We will document everything, and we will not let him make our beacon into his leash." Wulf grunted. "My fire will not wear a leash." Ida looked at Osric. "We should use the old channel for the next arrival," quietly. "So Holt cannot say he knows all our paths." Osric nodded. "Yes. We do it soon." As if summoned by that decision, a shout rose from the outer wall. A sail offshore. A merchant ship approaching cautiously, lingering in deeper water, waiting for a clear signal. Osric felt the calm trick of the morning fall away. The sea had been waiting. Now it offered work. He stepped into the pilot boat again, because that was what he did. Ida stepped in too because that was what she did. Alden stayed with Bryn because someone had to keep records and because Alden's knees had finally voted no. Osric guided the pilot boat out, not toward the usual line but toward the deeper-sounding route they had measured. He used Saltwick's lantern curve and Candle Rock and the feel of the swell. The merchant captain shouted a question about storm words. Osric called back, calm and firm. Follow the low line, trust the depth. Do not chase any lone light. The ship followed. The lead line confirmed their path. The bottom felt right. The water behaved, grudgingly. They brought the ship in through the older channel, quiet as a stitched seam. From the pier, it looked like ordinary pilot work. From offshore, it looked like luck. Osric preferred luck that could be measured with lead. By the time the ship was tied and the cargo secured, dusk was settling. Stormwood burned steady, Saltwick lights glowed low, Greyhaven's people moved with tired competence. Holt was gone for now, but his name had joined the harbour's list of winter problems. Inside the net shed, lamplight warmed hands and faces. Ida returned to her stitching. Osric warmed his palms and listened to the quiet. Alden wrote notes. Bryn drank something hot and pretended it was not comfort. Wulf stared into the lamp flame like he was checking whether it was being respectful. Harrick Stone sat on a bench near the door, quiet. After a while he spoke. In my coast, men like Holt come and go. The sea remains, but men can make the sea worse. Osric nodded. Yes. Ida replied, we will not let him. Outside, the North Sea moved in darkness, still cold, still stubborn. But Greyhaven had more than one line of guidance now, and more than one way to refuse a lie. Chapter 10. When the North Sea finally gets tired. The last storm of the season arrived with the politeness of a door being kicked in. The sky went black at midday. The wind snapped from west to north in a single hour, as if it had changed its mind and wanted everyone to notice. Rain came sideways, then turned to sleet that rattled against wood and stone like thrown gravel. Greyhaven had seen worse, but it had not seen worse with Garvin Holt nearby. That combination made the air feel heavier, like weather and boots were working together. Osric Pike stood at the pier head and watched the sea rise. Waves struck the outer wall and burst over it in sheets that froze as they fell. The harbour water churned, current colliding with wind, making short, sharp chop inside the supposed safety of stone. Bryn Hale paced along the pier like a man measuring disaster. Wulf Rowan was on Beacon Cliff with Stormwood burning high, because this was the kind of storm that justified pride. But Wulf used the agreed patterns now. 2 lifts, 3 lifts. Steady burn, because even Wulf could learn when the sea was loud enough to make learning mandatory. Ida Thorne had moved the net shed lamp closer to the door so it could be seen from the pier. She had also tied down every loose thing that might become airborne. She did it without being asked, which was how Greyhaven survived most of its days. Harrick Stone kept his crew close to the Longship, checking lines and fenders, making sure the sleek hull did not grind itself into splinters against the pier. Harrick's face was calm, but his eyes watched the harbour mouth, where fog and spray turned the world into a shifting grey wars. Alden arrived with his robe soaked at the hem and his parchment bundle wrapped in oilcloth like a reluctant child. I have news, he said. Bryn frowned. If it is Holt, I already dislike it. Alden nodded. It is Holt. He returned this morning. He brought more men. He brought heavier papers. He also brought a request. Ida looked up from tying a rope. A request. In a storm. That is bold. Alden continued. He requests that Stormward's beacon be tended by his men for the duration of the storm, for safety and oversight. Wulf's voice thundered down from the cliff path. Absolutely not. Bryn's mouth hardened. He will not touch it. Osric felt his chest tighten, not from fear but from the shape of the trap. Holt did not need to own the beacon forever. He only needed to touch it once. He could change a pattern, shift a signal, claim it was an accident, and in a storm, accidents were believable. Osric spoke quietly. Where is he now? Alden pointed toward the dock hall. He waits inside, warm with his men. He says time matters, Ida murmured. Time always matters to men who arrive late. Bryn straightened. We will not argue with him inside where he feels important. We will answer on the pier where the wind can remind him he is not in charge. They went to the dock hall together, but they did not enter. Bryn stood outside the door, rain and sleet striking his cloak. Osric stood beside him. Ida stood with arms folded, not cold, just unimpressed. Alden held his oilcloth bundle. Harrick stood slightly behind, quiet, present. Bryn called into the hall. "Garvin Holt! Come out!" A pause. Then Holt stepped into the doorway, cloak dry, expression controlled. Two men followed him, hands near their belts again, as if belts contained law. Holt looked at the storm, then at Bryn. This is precisely why oversight is needed. Bryn replied evenly. Storm is precisely why your hands stay away from our beacon. Holt's eyes narrowed. You refuse lawful order. Alden stepped forward and held up the new parchment Holt had brought, not taking it, only reading it. This still does not say you control a beacon. It says you may investigate smuggling and request cooperation from local officials. Holt's mouth tightened. The beacon is a matter of safety. Ida spoke softly. Safety is not your interest. Control is. Holt looked at her. You speak too freely for a net mender. Ida smiled faintly. You speak too freely for a man who cannot light a fire without paying someone else to do it. One of Holt's men shifted, annoyed. Holt raised a hand, stopping him. He kept his gaze on Osric. Pilot, you understand risk. In this storm, a wrong signal could unalive a ship. I offer disciplined oversight to prevent mistakes, Osric answered calmly. Then you can stand on the pier with the rest of us and watch. That will prevent mistakes. Your hands will remain empty. Holt's smile returned thin. Your stubbornness is impressive. It will also be expensive. Bryn replied, Expensive for whom? Holt did not answer directly. He leaned in slightly, voice lower. There is a ship offshore, a larger trader. It carries cloth and grain and perhaps other goods. It has been seen on suspicious routes. If it enters Greyhaven during this storm, I will consider Greyhaven complicit in whatever it carries. Osric felt the trap click into place. Holt was not only threatening the beacon, he was threatening the harbour's reputation, using the storm as leverage. Ida's eyes narrowed. So you plan to blame us for the sea? Holt said smoothly, I plan to enforce order. Alden spoke quietly. Your definition of order sounds like convenient accusation. Holt's gaze hardened. Decide quickly. My men can climb to Stormward, they can ensure signals are correct, or you can keep your pride and risk consequences. Above them, Wulf's beacon flared as the wind gusted. The fire leaned but held. Wulf would rather set his own boots on fire than let Holt's men near that basket. Osric spoke, measured and calm. We will guide the ship in safely if it is theirs. We will do it with our signals and our pilots. You may watch, you may write notes, you may do nothing else. Holt's mouth tightened again. Then I will watch. Bryn nodded. Watch from the pier, not from the cliff. Holt stepped back, expression controlled, and gestured for his men to follow him out onto the pier. The storm slapped them immediately, stealing some of their confidence. One of them flinched. Ida noticed and looked pleased. They returned to the pier head. Spray burst over the wall. The harbour mouth was a blur of white and grey, but Osric could hear something through the wind, a deep creak and a distant sail snap, the sound of a larger vessel struggling in the outer water. A lantern flashed in the storm, far out, low and desperate. Not a wandering lure, a ship signal, a call for help. Bryn shouted to be heard. There is the ship! Holt lifted his chin. Now you will see why oversight matters. Osric did not waste breath arguing. He turned to Ida. Saltwick line must be visible. Keep it bright. Keep it steady. No extra movement. Ida nodded. Already. Osric turned to Harrick. I need rowers, strong ones. Harrick gestured. Two of his crew stepped forward without hesitation. They were used to hard water. They were also less likely to panic for Holt's benefit. Osric stepped into the pilot boat. The wind hit his face like a cold hand. The boat bucked at the wall gap. The rowers took the oars, Ida stepped into the boat too, because she always did, and because she did not believe in letting Osric carry Winter alone. Holt called out over the storm. "Use the beacon! Keep the ship on stormward line!" Osric called back, calm and clear. "Fog and spray will bend that light. We use the low line and the sounding route. Watch and learn." Holt's face tightened, but the storm stole any reply. The pilot boat slipped out through the harbour mouth. Immediately the sea grabbed it, lifting and dropping it with sharp motion. Spray froze on Osric's sleeves. He kept his mind steady. Storms were noise. He listened for what stayed consistent under noise. He aimed south of the usual line, toward the deeper route they had measured. Candle Rock was invisible now, but Osric could feel where it should be by the pattern of swell change and the sound of surf. Raven Reef's roar was louder, closer, a constant reminder. The trader offshore appeared through the spray, a broad-hulled ship heaving, sail half lowered, men on deck clinging to lines. Its lantern swung wildly. The ship was too far north, exactly where Holt's false fire had tried to lure ships before. The storm had done the luring this time. Osric raised his lantern and shouted, "Hold! Do not turn toward any single light. Follow the low line south, slow your head, let the sea pass under you." A voice answered, strained and angry, "We cannot see your low line." Osric lowered the lead line and read depth quickly. He shouted back, "Then you follow my boat. Keep me just off your bow. Do not chase my lantern. Keep distance. Listen for my calls." The rowers pulled hard, keeping the pilot boat in position. Osric guided by sounding, calling depths in words the ship's helmsman could use. "Deeper. Hold. Now shallower. Touch south. Keep steady." Ida held the lantern low and shielded. She did not wave it. She kept it steady. A calm point in a storm. Osric appreciated her silence. Silence was a gift in weather like this. The trader followed, slow, reluctant, but listening. Osric could tell the captain was fighting panic and pride. Panic wanted speed. Pride wanted to pretend speed was control. Osric gave them neither. He gave them steps, simple actions. Sound, turn, hold. A swell rose and slammed the trader's side, pushing it north. Osric shouted, "South. Now. 2 points. Slow." The helmsman obeyed. The ship corrected. The lead line showed depth increasing. The deeper route was holding. The old channel they had measured was doing what it was meant to do, letting a ship approach without the reef's hungry pull catching it. They neared the harbour mouth. Inside, Stormward's beacon burned high. Saltwick lights glowed low, but through spray they looked like faint stars pinned to shore. Enough. Just enough. Osric called to the trader. "You are aligned. Hold. Let the wall take the worst. Do not turn too early." The trader surged toward the gap. Waves burst over the outer wall. Foam and spray filled the mouth like a beast breathing. Osric timed the approach, watching the rhythm. Between surges there was a fraction of calm. He guided the pilot boat through in that calm, then shouted, "Now, follow." The trader followed, bow entering the gap as the next surge hit, but the wall softened it. The ship lurched, but it did not swing north. It held the line. It crossed into the harbour. Inside, the water was still rough but less murderous. Men on the pier threw ropes. Bryn shouted instructions. Harrick's crew moved with practiced discipline. Ida's net shed lamp glowed warm in the chaos, a steady circle that made the harbour feel like a place again. Holt stood on the pier, soaked now, watching with narrowed eyes. His men looked miserable. Misery was honest. The trader was hauled alongside and tied fast. Its hull bumped once, then settled. Men on deck slumped with relief, hands shaking. No one cheered. In Greyhaven, surviving a storm did not earn applause. It earned a hot drink and the right to complain later. Osric climbed onto the pier. His sleeves were stiff with ice. His face felt numb. He did not show it. He walked to Bryn and nodded once. In. Bryn's shoulders loosened slightly. Good. Holt stepped forward, voice sharp. "You brought it in with an unauthorized route." Osric looked at him calm. "I brought it in with a safe route." Holt's eyes narrowed. "You defy oversight even in a storm." Ida stepped up beside Osric, dripping wet, eyes steady. "We did not defy safety, we defied Eward. Try not to confuse the two." Holt's mouth tightened. I will record this. Alden, who had been standing under a hooded lantern and writing anyway, looked up. Please do. Write the truth. It will be a new experience for you. Holt glared at Alden, then glanced toward Beacon Cliff, where Wulf stood like a shadow beside Stormwood's fire. The beacon still burned. Holt had not touched it. That seemed to irritate him more than the storm. Holt said, "This is not finished." Bryn replied, "No, it is winter." Holt turned and walked away along the pier, his men following, shoulders hunched. The storm kept striking them. Greyhaven watched them go the way it watched weather. You did not chase it. You waited to see what it did next. As the storm rolled on into evening, it began to tire. The wind shifted slightly. The sleet softened into rain. The waves still struck the wall, but the bursts were less violent. The sea was not kind. It was simply running out of energy, like a person who had shouted too long. Inside the net shed, lamplight glowed. Ida set out mugs. Someone brought broth. Someone brought dry cloth. Harrick sat near the door, quiet, his crew warming hands. Bryn stood by the table with Alden, reading notes and making decisions that would become rules, because Bryn could not help himself. Wulf came down from the cliff late, smelling of smoke and satisfaction. He looked at Holt's retreating shape through the shed window and grunted. "He did not touch my fire." Ida replied, "You look disappointed." Wulf scowled. "I look victorious." Osric sat near the lamp and let his breathing slow. His hands ached, his face thawed. Outside, the harbour creaked and settled. Saltwick lanterns still glowed low on the sands, steady as patience. Stormwood's beacon burned high, steady as stubbornness. Alden spoke softly, as if speaking too loud might wake the storm again. "The sea will calm. Holt will return, or he will send others. But we have records now. We have the Priory chart. We have the sounding route." Bryn nodded. "And we have each other, which is inconvenient but useful." Ida smiled faintly. "That might be the nicest thing you have ever said." Bryn looked offended. "Do not tell anyone." Harake watched the lamplight for a long moment, then spoke quietly. "In spring my ship will leave. I will remember Greyhaven as a place that does not chase shadows." Osric nodded. "That is all we can be." Outside, the wind eased another fraction. The sea did not become gentle, but it became less loud. The North Sea, for one night at least, seemed tired of arguing. Greyhaven's lights held steady in the dark, high and low, proud and practical, guiding any careful sailor who knew how to listen.